Chapter 1342. Not long after, an explosive piece of news spread like wildfire on Carapace Island. The Ten Kings Palace was attacked by a mysterious person. The terrifying magic destroyed 4 of the palaces, and many demons were injured or killed. The Ten Kings Palace's treasury was raided, and all the protection fees they collected this year were taken away. They lost more than 300 million copper coins. Apart from the Ten Kings Palace being raided 5 years ago and all 10 palaces being destroyed at the same time, Carapace Island hadn't had such a crazy incident for many years. The Ten Kings Palace deemed the calamity back then as a natural disaster, and forbade the residents of Carapace Island from talking about it ever since. They didn't expect something like this to happen again today. Even the money was taken away. The Ten Kings Palace obviously couldn't use a natural disaster as an excuse this time. The demons on Carapace Island were more resentful than grateful to the Ten Kings Palace. After hearing about this, the sales of the Crayfish Restaurant's beer increased tremendously. Furthermore, the Ten Kings Palace couldn't even take care of themselves after such a huge incident. They probably couldn't find trouble with the Crayfish Restaurant for the time being. Their beautiful days of eating crayfish and iced beer should last for a while. Meg's eyelids twitched as he listened to the demon's gossip. He didn't expect Irina to do such a huge thing in such a short time. He couldn't help but ask her softly, "Is there really 300 million copper coins?" Poverty limits their imagination. Irina shook her head and extended 5 fingers. Meg raised his eyebrows and was speechless. She earned 500 million copper coins in such a short time. Why would he still sell crayfish with such earning power? He could just go home and be a gigolo. Someone would be able to take care of him just by moving his waist. It's a little more than last time. Looks like I'll have to take care of them for a few more years after this one, Irina said regretfully. It's all right. They'll grow back even after you cut them. They're good leeks, Meg consoled her. At the same time, he felt sorry for the Ten Kings Palace for a second. The 4 demons today directly caused this wave of leeks to be harvested in advance. Although it was just one cut sooner or later, Irina's cut had indeed resolved the trouble the Ten Kings Palace was about to cause. Even if the 10 major tribes sent people to investigate, they wouldn't have thought that the culprit was still on Carapace Island and running a crayfish restaurant. The garlic crayfish that was newly introduced at noon was also loved by the customers, especially those who couldn't easily accept the spicy taste of the spicy crayfish. They regarded the garlic crayfish as the savior of their tongues. While enjoying the delicacy, they could easily accept the taste of the spicy crayfish. That was the happiest thing. This woman is simply too mesmerizing. She's so powerful, and she's so aggressive when she slapped the chair. She's simply irresistible. Of the world. That of. Irina seemed to have sensed something, and she slowly turned to look at Angela. Ha! She's here again. Irina's lips curled into an interested smile. Did this rare 8th-tier succubus like eating crayfish, or did she want to eat her husband? Or did she want to eat both? Irina walked towards Angela at that thought. Angela lowered her head and crushed the crayfish pincers with a crunch. Then, she carefully peeled the shell and dipped the meat in the garlic sauce before taking a big bite. The fragrance of the garlic blossomed instantly. It wasn't as stimulating as the spicy crayfish, but it wasn't any less delicious. It had a mild texture, but it was shockingly explosive. The aroma immediately aroused the taste buds on the tip of the tongue. The plump crayfish meat was shockingly springy. The fresh and sweet crayfish meat was accompanied by a mouthful of minced garlic. This kind of happiness was so moving that it made one want to cry. This is too delicious. Angela couldn't help but praise. Although the crayfish had 2 completely different flavors, they were equally delicious. It was amazing. Angela put down the crayfish pincers that she finished eating. When she looked up, she realized that Irina had come to the table and was looking at her with a smile. Is it delicious? Irina asked with a smile. Yes. It's delicious. Angela nodded nervously. She was a little uneasy and fluttering. Did she already realize that I was staring at her? Why did she come up to strike up a conversation with me? Maybe, she's also interested in me. A series of questions flashed through Angela's mind. She looked at Irina with an unfocused gaze. Irina looked at Angela, whose eyes were unfocused and seemed to be in a daze, and said, "The crayfish restaurant lacks an employee. If you're interested, you can come and try. It's a short-term job." "Ah, you want me to join the crayfish restaurant?" Angela was stunned. She tossed the messy questions in her mind to the back of her head and looked at Irina in shock. Her mind was a little muddled. "Yes." Irina nodded. "Could it be, she's interested in me? She wants to get me to her side first, then." Angela didn't dare to continue thinking about what would happen next. She nodded without hesitation. "I'm willing." She's indeed a woman who's ready to throw herself at you." Irina smirked in disdain. She wanted to see what this 8th-tier succubus was capable of and whether she could seduce her man. She calmly said, "In that case, you can stay after you're done eating." "Millimeter." Angela nodded repeatedly. She thought for a while, and said, "I should be free to move around other than mealtimes, right?" She was happy, but she had important matters to attend to on this trip to Carapace Island. It was a good idea to use the identity of a waiter in the crayfish restaurant as a cover, but she had to have her own time. "Yes. You can do as you see fit for the rest of the time." Irina nodded. "All right, I think I'll like this job." Angela revealed a charming smile. However, Irina had already turned around and left. "I'm going to marry this damned woman sooner or later." Angela looked at Irina's back. As an existence that attracted both men and women, the harder it was to conquer the target, the more she wanted to conquer it. After the lunch service ended, Meg looked at Angela and then at Irina with some hesitation. "New employee? Hello, I'm Angela." Angela smiled and blinked at Meg out of habit. However, after she confirmed that the eyes of enchantment had no effect on Meg, she couldn't be bothered to make such a useless attempt on Meg. Moreover, it wasn't him who had hit her sexual orientation. Chapter 1343. The busy lunchtime did make Meg want to recruit another waiter to reduce the pressure on Jane and improve the overall efficiency of the crayfish restaurant. However, this succubus lady didn't seem to be a suitable choice. It wasn't that Meg was racist. Succubi weren't the same as bad women. It was just that this succubus lady with extraordinary strength was obviously not easy to deal with. If she received a customer and threw her eyes of enchantment, who knew what would happen? Moreover, this might change the taste of the restaurant and make the customers unable to focus on enjoying the food. They might not come for the crayfish but to see the succubus lady's face. This is a problem. It's just a short-term job. She's interested and I think it's quite suitable. What do you think? Irina asked when she saw Meg's hesitation. Then it settled. Meg thought for a while and felt that Irina was right. It was just a short-term job of less than 10 days. It didn't matter what kind of demon she was if he found someone to help him. Moreover, if the crayfish couldn't make the customers abandon all distracting thoughts and devote themselves wholeheartedly, then it wouldn't be a top-notch crayfish. He still had to have this confidence. "Hello, I'm Hades. You can call me boss." Meg looked at Angela and nodded slightly, then said, "I wonder if Miss Angela is up to the task of collecting the plates and cleaning the table." "Just collect the plates casually. What's so difficult about that?" Angela said with a relaxed expression and glanced at Meg. This man actually underestimated her. An excellent succubus like her is hard to come by in 100 years. If it weren't for this beautiful young lady, she wouldn't have come to this restaurant to be a waiter. "Then, please clear the remaining plates on the table and wipe the tables and chairs. That's your job for this afternoon," Mag said with a smile. Now? Angela was slightly taken aback. She didn't expect the job to come so quickly. "Yes." Meg nodded. "Jane is in charge of ordering and serving the dishes. You're in charge of cleaning the table and cleaning up. I think you should be able to do a good job." Angela raised her hand with a relaxed expression and smiled. "Of course. This is a small matter. It's not difficult for me at all." After saying that, he walked directly to the nearest dining table. Clang, clang, clang. He piled the bowls and plates on the table onto the tray, forming a messy little hill. When he lifted the tray, the seemingly stable little hill suddenly collapsed, and the bowls and plates slid in all directions. I'll catch. I'll catch. I'll bite. I'll catch. Crackle. The plates broke to the floor. Mag looked at Angela, who had a plate in her mouth, a plate in each hand, and a plate on her right leg with an innocent expression. He raised his eyebrows and had a bad feeling about this. Irina and Amy burst out laughing on the spot. Jane looked at Angela worriedly and felt sorry for the bowls on the floor. Such good bowls were broken just like that. She had just reminded this sister that the plates shouldn't be stacked like that. This was an accident, Angela said awkwardly as she slowly retracted her foot and put the bowl on the floor. She didn't expect that the boast she had made a second ago would be exposed by herself in the next second. This kind of pain, probably no one could understand. I think these bowls ran to the floor by themselves, Irina said with a smile. Angela looked at Irina gratefully. She didn't expect her to use such clumsy words to resolve the awkwardness. She really didn't misjudge her. I think so too. These bowls are too naughty. Meg nodded and then looked at Jane. Jane, you teach Angela how to clean the plates. Okay. Jane nodded. She first swept the gravel on the floor and then began to teach Angela how to stack the plates from small to large so that they wouldn't fall over. She also taught her how to wipe the table. I didn't expect it to be so troublesome to clean a table. Angela let out a long sigh of relief after Jane cleaned up all the tables. This was more tiring than seducing 100 men. It's okay, Sister Angela. You learn very quickly. I believe you will be able to easily master all this very soon, Jane encouraged with a smile. Of course. Angela smiled confidently. She looked at Jane's golden horn that was glowing faintly. Jane, your golden horn is really beautiful. I have never seen such a beautiful horn before. Thank you. Jane blushed. No one had ever praised her beauty before. I'm done with my work at noon. I'll get off work first. I'll come back at night. Angela said her goodbyes and turned to leave the lobster restaurant. Meg and the others also entered the restaurant. You seem to be a little wary of her, Irina said as she took a sip of water. An 8th grade succubus of unknown origin, and she's obviously not a native of Carapace Island. I'm afraid that we will be implicated if she gets into any trouble. Meg nodded. Angela was obviously not a female classmate without a story. Like raiding the 10 Kings Palace's treasury and then blowing up the 5 palaces? Irina asked with a smile. Meg was speechless for a moment. Speaking of which, the one who should be worried about being implicated was Angela. Actually, I'm also quite curious about her identity and why she came to Carapace Island. Irina put down her cup. So, I'm not going to take a nap. I'm going to see who she is. Tailing her? Meg raised his eyebrows. Yeah, that's a good description. Irina nodded. Can I bring Amy along? Amy found a big hat from somewhere, and put it on her head, covering half of her face. When she raised her head, her entire face couldn't be seen. Only her little chin could be seen. Of course. Let's set off now. Irina smiled as she held Amy's hand. A green teleportation portal lit up under their feet, and they disappeared in the blink of an eye. Can we also? Before Meg could finish his sentence, he and Ugly Duckling were left looking at each other in the room. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling meowed at him, walked over, and rubbed its furry head against his leg. All right, let's take a nap obediently. Meg sighed. He squatted down and stroked Ugly Duckling's head. What else could he do? A house husband with no status in the family could only make ends meet by cooking at home. I think it's here. They like to indulge in debauchery even in broad daylight. These filthy male beasts really shouldn't exist in this world. Angela walked into a dark alley. Some strange sounds came from the low stone houses with red cloth hanging on both sides. Red lights came from the houses with a corner raised. How much do you charge per time? A drunk demon stumbled out of a house. His eyes lit up when he saw Angela, and he pounced on her while stuttering. Chapter 1344. One life, one time, Angela said coldly. Angela said coldly. She raised her hand and pressed the demon's head into his crotch. With the crisp sound of bones breaking, she raised her leg and sent him flying 100 meters away, crashing into a dilapidated house in the distance. Angela clapped her hands, lifted the curtain of the red wine house, and walked in. Wow, big sister Angela is so cool. Amy stood on the eaves of a house in the alley and clapped her hands. She's surprisingly efficient. Irina was also surprised. She looked at the house and showed some doubts. But why is she here? Does she work here during the day? That can't be right. If she works, she wouldn't have killed that guy just now. Then why is she here? Irina thought for a while. A green light flashed under her feet, and she directly teleported into the house with Amy. At the same time, she set up a sound enchantment. It was a small room with only a messy bed. A succubus was lying on the bed with only a thin blanket covering her. Her plump and fair thighs were exposed, and there were fine wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. Even the thick makeup couldn't hide the traces left behind by the passage of time. She was looking at Angela, who had just walked in, with a surprised expression. Newcomer? The succubus quickly regained her composure. She looked at Angela with the gaze of a senior looking at a junior. There was a trace of envy in the depths of her eyes. What a young body, what spirited eyes. When she was young, many male demons would go crazy just by looking at her. Unfortunately, that time had passed. She was also old. I'm not a junior who's here to steal your business. I'm the only successor of the succubus royal family, the queen of the succubi Angela Auster. Angela raised her hand, and a holy white lotus lit up in her palm. It slowly rotated in the light and then bloomed. Holy white lotus. That succubus looked at the white lotus in Angela's palm in disbelief. She thought of some legends, and her body began to tremble. She hurriedly got up from the bed and knelt in front of Angela. She pressed her forehead against the ground, and respectfully and humbly said, "Esteemed queen, please forgive my recklessness and rudeness. You've finally descended again. Big sister Angela is the queen. Then why is she a waitress?" Amy was puzzled. She couldn't understand. I didn't expect the succubus queen to appear again. No wonder she could cultivate to the 8th tier. It turns out that she has obtained the recognition of the holy white lotus. Irina was deep in thought as she recalled some of the records regarding the succubi. Many years ago, the queen of the succubi was famous queen of the succubi's name. However, following the death of the succubus king, the succubus clan gradually declined. Their clansmen were scattered all over the continent. Because of their innate charm, they became the playthings of the various clans and were labeled as sluts. Perhaps everyone had forgotten, including the succubi themselves, that they had once believed in the purest and most sacred white lotus, untainted even in the mud. Get up. Angela kept the white lotus. She reached out to help the succubus up from the ground, and covered her with a sheet. That succubus still didn't dare to look at Angela. She lowered her head, and her body was trembling from agitation. "I'm here to bring you away," Angela said to that succubus. That succubus raised her head abruptly, and looked at Angela in disbelief. It had been so many years. Even the succubi themselves didn't believe in the legend of the holy white lotus anymore. They were immersed in lust, and treated themselves as playthings for men. They allowed them to vent their lust in exchange for very little money. They had no way to resist, nor did they have the ability to resist. No matter where they went, they were always labeled as lowly and slutty. Therefore, they lied in this small house in this dark alley, and accepted everything calmly. However, that succubus with the white lotus in her hand really appeared. She came to this dirty and dark alley, and extended her hand to her, saying that she wanted to bring her away from here. "Where are we going?" That succubus hesitated for a moment, and asked softly. She had had enough of drifting and wandering before coming to Carapace Island. She was afraid to experience that kind of life again. "Perhaps you have all forgotten. We succubi once had our own territory, and a holy land full of white lotuses." Angela looked at that succubus, and said softly, "I'm here to bring you home." The succubus was stunned. Home, what an unfamiliar word. Tears fell from the corners of her eyes uncontrollably, and then became silent sobs. "Close the door, don't take anything, and be prepared to leave with me anytime." No one can force you to do anything in the future. Angela patted her shoulder lightly, and then turned to walk out of the door to the next bungalow. That succubus looked at Angela's back, and quickly wiped away her tears. She took out the long dress she wore when she was young from the bottom of the cupboard, and put it on. The coarse long dress was a little ugly, but it covered all the parts that those animals liked. Then, she slammed the door shut. Surprisingly interesting. Irina left with Amy, but she didn't follow Angela again. She brought Amy back to the restaurant. The Queen of Succubi. A new style. Meg raised his eyebrows after hearing Irina's description. He felt that things weren't that simple. Irina said, I once read in a book that the Queen of Succubi is best at mental magic attacks. She can kill people without leaving a trace, and can even control the actions of others. Although the succubi didn't dominate a region back then, because of the Queen of Succubi's existence, no other race dared to provoke her. Seems like she wants to revive the succubi race, and is gathering her people again. Meg was deep in thought. The situation is similar to the night elves, but it won't be easy for her to bring all the succubi away under the nose of the Ten Kings Palace. Irina shook her head. After all, she's not me. Although it was a little pretentious, Meg had to admit that Irina's words weren't wrong at all. Seems like we have indeed recruited a problematic employee. Meg felt a headache coming on. When necessary, I will give her some help. Just treat it as an employee benefit, Irina said generously. You're really a good lady, boss. Meg was a little jealous. Isn't that so? I knew I could take on this role. Anything is negotiable. But please don't bring Xiao Mi to the brothel next time. Meg looked at the proud Irina and said helplessly. Was this something a normal mother would do? Irina replied non-committally. I'm going out too. I need to find someone to help me, Meg said to Irina, got up, and walked toward the beach. After paying the price of a breeding shrimp, Meg rented the deep-sea submarine from the system. He found a deserted beach, drove the submarine away from Carapace Island, and dove straight into the deep sea. Chapter 1345. Meg arrived at Lantiste very quickly, and met with the High Priest, Dexter. Meg hired the merfolk of Lantiste to help capture the escaped breeding crayfish. Each breeding crayfish could be exchanged for 100 beggars' chicken mud casings. Dexter gladly accepted Meg's request, and ordered all the merfolk who could leave Lantiste to capture the breeding crayfish. With the crayfish base as the center, they spread out to search for the breeding crayfish. I received Gina's letter the day before yesterday. She mentioned that Mr. Meg left the restaurant to collect ingredients. I didn't expect you to be at sea, Dexter said to Meg with a smile. There are countless ingredients in the sea. It's a good place to find inspiration and ingredients. Meg smiled. What else could he do? The system sent him out with just a command. He had no choice but to come. Do you need any other ingredients? If it's not convenient for you, we can all be of service to you, Dexter said. Meg was like a savior to Lantiste. The mud casings he created were saving Lantiste from the abyss. Currently, I only need to capture those escaped breeding crayfish and lock them back in my crayfish base. That's the most important thing. Meg shook his head. With Lantiste's help, he was much more confident in completing the mission. After all, the Lantistians were the real overlords in the sea. Crayfish were just crayfish. After informing Dexter of his current location, and telling him that if the merfolk caught any breeding crayfish, they could go ashore and pass it to him directly, Meg drove the submarine back to Carapace Island. On the way back, Meg happened to encounter a group of crayfish. The fishing net harvested them mercilessly, and caught over 500 crayfish, including 3 breeding crayfish. I'm rich now. Meg turned back to look at the crayfish in the tank, and suddenly felt the charm of gathering seafood. Anyway, the 2-hour rental period wasn't up yet. Meg drove the submarine and swept through the water crazily. He caught over 1,000 crayfish and returned with a bountiful haul. System, why don't you help me raise these crayfish first? Meg said in his heart on the way back. Back then, you were the one who wanted to leave. So be it. Now, you want to come back. Scram. You're really a fucking genius. Meg raised his eyebrows. He had no choice but to stop the submarine by the shore. Then, he jumped out of the submarine with more than 1,000 crayfish in one hand. 3 of the breeding prawns were carried separately. Along the way, the fisherman looked at Meg's huge net with shocked expressions. This boss is a real werewolf. A fisherman who had seen Meg before swallowed his saliva and said in shock. Meg sighed in his heart. He also wanted to keep a low profile, but there was no other way. His strength did not allow him to do so. The 10 Kings' Palace's treasury had been robbed in broad daylight, and 5 of their main halls had been blown up. It could be said that they had lost all face. Hence, the streets were filled with members of the 10 Kings' Palace searching for suspicious people. Occasionally, one could even see demons being executed on the spot. Meg carried the crayfish, avoided the lackeys of the 10 Kings' Palace, and returned to the restaurant. As soon as he entered the courtyard, he saw Irina and Amy digging a hole in the corner. "What are you doing?" Meg put down the crayfish and looked at the 2 of them in confusion. "There." Amy pursed her lips and motioned for Meg to look behind the rockery. Meg looked over and saw 3 demons who were tied up like dumplings and had rags stuffed in their mouths. They were looking at him in horror. From the epaulets on their shoulders, it could be seen that they belonged to the 10 Kings' Palace. "Have we been discovered?" Meg asked as he retracted his head and looked at Irina, who had already dug a hole big enough to bury 3 people. "No, but they want to search the restaurant and are planning to attack Amy and me." Amy shook her head. "This hole is dug very artistically." Meg reached out and pulled the 3 demons who were struggling frantically out of fear from behind the rockery. He threw them into the hole, and each of them was covered with a metal shovel. They immediately became obedient. He picked up the shovel and covered the hole with soil. Then, he stomped on it a few times, and the hole immediately became very flat. "Will a nest of demons grow next year if I water it?" Amy asked expectantly as she poured some water over the hole. "Maybe." Meg nodded with a smile. Amy finally noticed the crayfish that Meg had brought back and asked in surprise, "But father, where did you go to catch so many big prawns?" "The sea." "Then can I have 2 big prawns tonight?" Amy asked expectantly. "Of course, Amy can eat as many as you want." Meg patted Amy's head lovingly and poured all the crayfish into the pool. The delicious garlic crayfish was loved by many customers. Before the opening time of the restaurant at 5 o'clock, customers had already started to line up at the restaurant's entrance. There was no limit to the crayfish, and you could eat as many as you wanted. However, the crayfish were freshly caught by the fishermen, and they would sell as many as there were in the pool until they were all sold out. Demons with good appetites could eat an entire pot of crayfish at once. If there were a few more of them, the demons behind would not be able to eat at all. Therefore, many demons chose to line up in advance. However, to the surprise of the customers, the big pool in the corner was full of crayfish today, and the pool was almost overflowing. It seemed that the customers tonight were in for a treat. 13 spice crayfish, a new flavor. Try it. Meg came out with a few pots of crayfish, and the aroma wafted over, making the eyes of the 3 people sitting at the table light up at the same time. Chapter 1346. The 13 spice crayfish was a great invention. Of course, the greatest was still the chef who invented the 13 spice crayfish. The exact creator was no longer known. However, the godfather of the 13 spice crayfish, Wang Shuyi, was also worthy of Meg's praise. After all, Wang Shuyi's 13 spice crayfish was one of the top 4 condiments along with Larogan Ma chili sauce, Maro de Gong spicy sauce, and Wang Ji his tofu curd. Wang Shuyi's 13 spice crayfish was a household name, and was a must-have for many housewives. 13 spice sunflower seeds, 13 spice dried tofu, 13 spice chicken drumstick, 13 spice quail egg, there was nothing that couldn't be made without 13 spice. He had successfully established his position in the condiment world. The steaming hot crayfish was bright red in color and had a fragrant aroma. Although it was called 13 spice, after Wang Shuyi and Wang Xiao's systems upgrade and modification, there were far more than just 13 spices in the 13 spice crayfish. The number of spices wasn't for the sake of having more, nor was it a competition. They complemented each other, creating the unique flavor and distinct layers of wonderful taste of the 13-spice crayfish. Meg took a bite of the crayfish head. It was spicy and fragrant, with a lingering fragrance. It was so delicious that he couldn't stop eating. It's so delicious. I like this crayfish flavor. It would be better if it was a little spicier, Amy said as she pouted and breathed in. But I think it's already very spicy. Jane's lips were red as she breathed in. She couldn't take it anymore, but she couldn't help but continue eating. After eating crayfish for 3 consecutive days, Meg also prepared a steamed sea bass. This was a wild sea bass that he caught on the way back. Meg picked up a piece of fish and put it into his mouth. The meat was tender, bouncy, and extremely delicious. It was worthy of being called the best game. Steve, no one knows seafood better than me. I don't believe you if you say this is the most delicious crayfish on the Demon Islands. Could there be crayfish made by a demon that is more delicious than the king mantis shrimp on Pai Pai Island? A middle-aged demon with a brandy nose and thick blonde hair in the team said to the young demon beside him with a smile. As one of the few renowned gourmets among the demons, Tony Moody was a columnist for many renowned gourmet magazines. He presented the classic delicacies of the Demon Islands to the foodies of the Norland continent, and was renowned for his seafood reviews. He was hailed as the gourmet who knew seafood best in the world of food criticism. Tony had been a guest on the nearby Abyssal Island for the past few days. He was preparing to write a review of the most famous roasted pig trotters on the Abyssal Island to prove that he still had a very good business ability outside of seafood. However, to his disappointment, the roasted pig trotters did not bring him too much of a surprise. Although it had the characteristics of an abyssal demon, the porcupine battle boar trotters did not taste as good as he had imagined due to the crude roasting technique. This made him feel a little troubled as to what to write in the next issue of the gourmet column. The abyssal demons were the best of the top 10 demon clans. With the special delicacies of the abyssal demons as a gimmick, the sales of the magazine would definitely not be too bad. However, other than the gimmick, the taste that was not surprising enough, the way to eat it was a little bloody, and how to handle it artistically without being too exaggerated and disappointing the customers who came because of it. These problems required him to spend a lot of time thinking about. The Abyssal Island was not far from Carapace Island. His good friend Steve happened to be staying on Carapace Island, so he specially came to visit him. Steve insisted on bringing him to eat the so-called most delicious crayfish, which made him a little indignant. No one knew seafood better than him. When it came to crayfish, the most delicious one had to be the king mantis shrimp from Phi Island. On the Demon Islands, no demon was better at cooking crayfish than the Phi tribe. As for Carapace Island, it had a very special position in the food and beverage industry of the Demon Islands. It was famous for its low-end and messy food, but there were also some famous chefs. However, once they stood out, they would be recruited by the other clans, and would not choose to stay on Carapace Island. This was a new restaurant. According to Steve, it had only been opened for 2 to 3 days. Although he was not looking forward to it, what surprised him was that there was already a long line of dozens of people at the entrance before opening hours. This was not a common sight on Carapace Island, which was famous for its chaos. You'll know how it tastes after you try it. But let me tell you, when you enter the restaurant later, you have to pay attention to your words and actions. Although you're a qualified gentleman, don't show any disrespect to the lady boss and the waiters, Steve warned Tony with a serious expression. Oh, what's so special about it? Tony asked curiously. On the first day of opening, the lady boss and little boss killed a customer who didn't pay as a sacrifice to the gods. Yesterday, people from the 10 Kings Palace came to cause trouble and kicked a customer. Then, 4 members of the 10 Kings Palace were sent flying out of the restaurant. Although you are bigger in weight, you had better behave yourself if you don't want to fly out of the restaurant. I'm scared. Tony nodded in surprise. A fierce person who dared to send people from the 10 Kings Palace flying was indeed very rare on Carapace Island. After a short while, the restaurant's door opened, and a young demon walked out. His expression was slightly stiff, and his voice was a little hoarse as he said, "The restaurant is open for business. Please come in." What kind of demon is this? Tony sized up Meg. He had been to almost all of the demon islands and had some understanding of most of the demons. However, he could not recognize what kind of demon this was at that moment. It was really strange that he had a pair of pincers on his head. I haven't seen it before, either. I think it's one of those demons that almost went extinct. Steve shook his head. He could not recognize what kind of demon this boss was, either. The courtyard door opened, and the customers filed in. Soon, all the seats in the courtyard were filled. The remaining customers entered the restaurant and filled it up as well. Jane deftly set up a row of simple tables and chairs on the side of the street for the customers to take their seats. Is it really so charming that it can be done to this extent in just 2 days? Tony couldn't help but mumble as he looked at the hundreds of customers who took their seats in the blink of an eye. I can guarantee that after eating this crayfish, you won't want to write about the Abyss roasted pig trotters in this issues column, Steve said with a smile as he led Tony to a seat near the big pot in the center. I spent 5 whole days in the Abyss Island to write this column. Do you know how it feels to spend 5 whole days in the abyss that is filled with the smell of pig urine? How can I give up on such hard-earned first-hand information? Tony found it ridiculous and did not believe Steve's words at all. Steve was not in a hurry to refute. He picked up the table number board and looked at it. He looked at Meg, who was preparing with surprise, and said, "Boss, there's a new crayfish tonight?" "Yes, there's a new item tonight, 13 spice crayfish," Meg replied casually. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1347. 13 spices? Tony frowned slightly. What kind of flavor was that? He had been on the Demon Islands for many years, but this was the first time he had heard of such a flavor. It must be a different way of saying it. Tony comforted himself in his heart. Every demon race had a different understanding of cooking. Even if it was the same cooking method, it would be called differently. What kind of shrimp is this? Tony's eyes widened as he watched Mag scoop up a dark green prawn from the large pond. Mag was still waving his pincers recklessly, and he could tell that the prawn weighed over 2 kilograms, which was more than twice the size of the king mantis shrimp on Pai Pai Island. He had never seen a prawn with such a strange color before. Even prawns of similar sizes were green in color, so how could this one be so dark? How is it? Isn't this crayfish big and fat? Steve saw Tony's expression, and could not help but feel proud. He was a little brother when discussing delicacies in front of Tony. However, this time, he had to let Tony recognize his taste. The crayfish would definitely beat the Abyss roast pork trotters that he had been waiting for 5 days. Tony shook his head slightly, and commented, "This crayfish shell is greenish-black, so it must be very hard. It's not very convenient to eat. Even if the chef wants to do some processing, it will definitely cause damage to the meat. It's not a high-quality ingredient." Dong. 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 Before Tony could finish his words, the crayfish whose back was cut open and whose intestines were removed fell into the metal basin at the side, making crisp sounds. Every sound was like a slap to Tony's face. Looking at the flash of the knife, Tony couldn't see the real body of the kitchen knife. The hard shell of the prawn had been cut open, but the meat of the prawn wasn't damaged at all. He couldn't help but stand up with his mouth wide open. This knife skill was simply godly. Sit down, sit down. It's a routine operation, a routine operation. Steve pressed the shocked Tony back to his seat and said with a smile, "I admit that this boss's knife skill is indeed very exquisite, but knife skill is only one of the basic skills of a chef. The most important thing is the cooking skill." Tony controlled his expression. Most of the demon chef's cooking methods were rough, and such exquisite knife skills were rare, so he couldn't control his emotions. The 3 big basins of crayfish were quickly processed. Meg picked up the white wine jar at the side and pulled out the cork. A strong aroma of wine instantly spread out. He poured out a small ladle and splashed it on the crayfish that could still move. He then sprinkled in a handful of ginger slices before putting the lid on and leaving it at the side. Many drunkards couldn't help but take a few deep breaths of the wine. Their eyes lit up as they looked at the wine jar beside Meg's hand. "This is not for sale." Meg shook his head. He had already seen through everyone's thoughts. This is the step of marinating to remove the fishy smell. Some demon chefs also use wine to remove the fishy smell. The effect is not bad, but I can't smell what wine it is. The wine fragrance is very special and strong enough. It should be a strong wine. Tony closed his eyes and sensed the wine fragrance, but he couldn't tell what wine it was. Jane walked up and asked Tony and Steve, "Excuse me, what crayfish flavor would you like to order?" "3 flavors. I'll have 1 crayfish each and a large glass of beer," Steve said as he turned to the number plate. Then, he flipped the number plate to Tony's side. "Take a look and see what flavor you want." The menu is so simple. Tony was still wondering why this restaurant didn't have a menu. He didn't expect the menu to be simplified down to the number plate. Moreover, there were only 3 crayfish flavors and an alcohol called beer to choose from. He looked up at Jane and said, "I'll take all of them. 1 for each." "All right, please wait for a moment." Jane nodded slightly and walked to the next table. I didn't expect the service quality of Carapace Island to have improved to such an extent. The uniform style is also very special. Tony looked at Jane's back in surprise. The last time he was here, that demon waiter was completely yelling and screaming while serving. The impression was very bad. Unfortunately, this restaurant is the only one that has improved after 3 years. Steve shrugged. "Oh, there's also a beautiful succubus lady." Tony's gaze landed on Angela, who was standing at the entrance of the restaurant. Her graceful figure and seductive face made it hard for him to shift his gaze away. It was hard to find another succubus as beautiful as her even in the entire Demon Islands. Many demons couldn't help but secretly size her up. If such a beautiful succubus lady appeared in the red light district, it would be very lively every night. Meg also glanced at Angela. How to divert the customer's attention from the beautiful succubus lady to the crayfish was his biggest test tonight. He heated up the wok, poured in some oil, and then added in all kinds of spices to stir fry. The 3 stoves were turned on at the same time, and 3 different crayfish flavors were stir-fried in the 3 wok. 13 spices. It should be a type of spice. This name sounds a little strange, Tony analyzed. Chefs nowadays like to find some gimmicks for their dishes. No, 13 spices are 13 types of spices. Of course, it has completely exceeded that number now. Meg shook his head and denied. He felt a sense of familiarity from this customer. He must have been in the same line of work in the past. Tony was speechless. He was being sniped. Steve snickered. It was the first time he saw Tony being humiliated like this. He was right to come today. Meg wandered between the 3 wok. The black and green crayfish danced in the wok and gradually turned into a bright red color. The 3 different fragrances also spread out. This fragrance. I can't tell what spices were added in it, but it smells so good. Tony, who was sitting not far from the 3 wok, muttered in surprise and astonishment. His eyes lit up completely. The red-hot crayfish was poured full of beer and covered with it. Then, the wok was covered with a lid. It boiled on a high flame, simmered on a medium flame, and waited for the right time to remove the lid. The freshness of the crayfish was mixed with the taste of various spices, and became even thicker. Everyone was already familiar with the spicy crayfish and the garlic crayfish that had just been introduced at noon, but the 13 spices crayfish that had just been introduced tonight had become the focus of all the customers' attention with its unique and rich fragrance. The rich and complex aroma and the layers of the aroma were astonishing. "Your crayfish." Jane walked over with a tray and placed 6 plates in front of Tony and Steve. Gulp. Tony couldn't help but swallow his saliva. The spicy crayfish wrapped in red oil, the garlic crayfish dipped in minced garlic, and the 13 spices crayfish with a unique fragrance. Which one to start with became a problem. Chapter 1348. In terms of experience, we should start with the bland dish. Otherwise, it will affect the taste of the food to a great extent. Tony held his chin and looked at the 3 big prawns in front of him. He was deep in thought. Which prawn could be considered bland? I suggest you eat the garlic crayfish first because the spiciness of the spicy crayfish is no joke, Steve reminded. He had already reached out to grab the garlic crayfish, twisted off its head, and dipped it in the garlic. Then, he took a bite and revealed a satisfied smile. Tony glanced at Steve, who was eating with relish, and his gaze landed on the garlic crayfish in the middle. The minced garlic turned golden after being stir-fried, and the rich garlic aroma wafted over. Surprisingly, it did not have the usual spiciness of garlic. Between the 13 spice and spicy aroma, it was indeed milder. Oh, this is the first time I've seen a seafood dish that uses garlic as a side dish. If this dish is served to the vampires, they might reveal their true forms right away, Tony said with a smile as he reached out to break off one of the pincers. The pincer had been hit by the back of the knife, and there was a slight crack on it. With a little force, the hard shell split into two, revealing the plump meat wrapped in it. The meat was very plump, and the gravy did not seep into the pincer through the cracks. Hence, it could be seen that the fire control of the prawn was very good, and it was taken out of the pot at the right time. However, he looked at the white and tender prawn meat, and then looked at the garlic on the plate, and hesitated. Tony didn't like garlic. This kind of ingredient was very popular among humans, but it wasn't common on the Demon Islands. The delicious seafood didn't seem to match the pungent smell of garlic. Moreover, there was a kind of irritating spiciness that made people feel annoyed. He had eaten garlic clove live fish sashimi on a small island last month, and the garlic taste in his mouth did not go away for a few days. Furthermore, the air behind him was not very fresh for a few days. If you eat the pincer without dipping it in the garlic, then this dish will lose its soul. Steve reminded him as he put the prawn's head down. He then broke off one of the pincers and pulled out the plump prawn meat. He then rolled it in the minced garlic so that the meat was covered in a layer of golden and shiny minced garlic. He then bit off half of the pincer with a satisfied expression. "I think you're playing me, but I don't have any evidence." Tony hesitated for a moment before rolling the pincers in his hand on the plate and applying a layer of minced garlic. "At most, I'll just take one bite. Even if the taste is a little strong, I'll just bear with it and it'll be over," Tony thought to himself. Then, he took a bite of the pincer that was dipped in minced garlic. The garlic wrapped around the prawn meat first bloomed on the tip of the tongue. The texture was surprisingly mild, without the unique spicy taste of garlic. After stir-frying, it became a wonderful taste that made the taste buds happy, instantly activating the taste buds. The plump and fresh prawn meat complemented the delicious minced garlic. The more one chewed, the more fragrant it became. Why does garlic taste like this? This is completely different from the garlic I've eaten before. This taste is so wonderful. It's gentle like the gentle comfort of the sea, yet so mellow. It doesn't take away the brilliance and freshness of the prawn meat at all. Instead, it makes it even more delicious. This taste. How can the prawn be made so delicious? Compared to this, the king of mantis shrimps can only be considered as a younger brother. This is the real supreme king of crayfish. Eat it and forget about the mantis shrimps. Tony's heart was filled with shock. This mouthful of prawn meat had completely subverted his understanding of prawns. He really couldn't imagine that there was actually a chef in this world who could make prawns taste so strange and wonderful. Even he, who claimed to have eaten all over the Demon Islands and knew seafood the best in this world, was deeply shocked. He dipped the remaining half of the prawn meat in the minced garlic and ate it in one bite. Feeling the wonderful taste on the tip of his tongue, Tony's face showed the same happy smile as Steve's. "Boss, you must have mistaken the garlic for something else, right? The garlic I've eaten wasn't as delicious as this." Putting down the pincers that he finished eating, Tony looked up at Meg and said. He was even more certain of his thoughts. This boss might have made a big mistake when he named it. Then, he added, "No one knows garlic better than me. It's something that makes people want to cry after eating it. It's not a friendly ingredient." "Are you talking about this?" Meg was chopping garlic. Hearing Tony's words, he swept the minced garlic on the chopping board into the oil pot and threw a small clove of garlic gently on the table in front of Tony. He said calmly, "This is ordinary garlic." Tony looked at the clove of garlic that was spinning in front of him. It was wrapped in a pinkish-purple outer layer, and a faint spicy smell had already broken through the outer layer and started to spread. It wasn't much different from the garlic he had seen before. In Meg's big pot, the minced garlic gradually turned golden as it was stir-frying. The fragrance of the minced garlic gradually bloomed, and it was no different from the minced garlic in the garlic crayfish. Tony was stunned. "Do you think I don't care about my reputation? I'm the most famous gourmet in the demon clan." Steve, who was drinking from his glass, laughed so hard that he coughed violently. Such an expression was really rare on Tony's face. "Huh! Isn't this Master Tony? I've seen her portrait in the magazine of Whole Foods." "Is that the gourmet who said that she knows seafood the best? It seems that she doesn't know much about it. She even mistook the spices. Maybe Boss Hades is too unique." Another customer recognized Tony. The reputation of the great gourmet was still quite widespread. Usually, at this time, Tony would get up and wave to everyone in a low-key manner. Then, he would satisfy one or two enthusiastic fans' requests for autographs and give a live review of the food under the admiring eyes of everyone, thus gaining more passers-by fans. But today, he hit a wall one after another, and he was noticed by everyone. Tony was a little flustered. Protecting his professionalism and reputation became the most important thing at the moment. "I think this is a very creative way of cooking. Using the right way to make garlic delicious," Tony said with a smile. Although he was cursing in his heart, the garlic crayfish was really delicious. He couldn't say anything against his heart. That would seem very unprofessional. The more you say, the more likely you are to make mistakes. After Tony said this, he immediately lowered his head and continued to taste the garlic crayfish. The back of the crayfish was cut open, from head to tail, but the crayfish meat itself was not damaged at all. The crayfish meat that was as thick as an arm was peeled out from the shell that was filled with minced garlic, dipped in the minced garlic, and then took a big bite. The whole world was instantly complete. Chapter 1349. How is it? How does it compare to your porcupine battle boar's roasted pork trotters? Steve asked with a smile as he looked at Tony, who was cleaning the plate with minced garlic. "If you had told me earlier that there was such delicious crayfish here, there wouldn't have been such a bloody roasted pork trotters," Tony said with a complicated expression. "It seems that it wasn't a wonderful experience for you." Steve shrugged. The abyssal demons were arrogant to begin with. Although Tony was rather famous in the culinary circle, he wasn't a VIP that those boar-riding abyssal demons had to treat seriously. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had to stay there for 5 days to eat the roasted pork trotters. "I think I have fallen in love with Carapace Island. The slightly salty sea breeze, the beautiful and polite service staff, and the delicious minced garlic crayfish. It was an unbelievably wonderful experience," Tony praised as he put down the bowl. He still wanted more. Steve looked at the remaining spicy crayfish and 13 spice crayfish. He looked up at Meg and asked, "Boss, which one is heavier between spicy and 13 spice?" "Is there a need to ask? There are so many spices in the 13 spice, so the taste is definitely heavier. Of course, I'll eat the spicy crayfish first." Tony chuckled as he was speechless at Steve's question. "My personal suggestion is to eat the 13 spice crayfish first," Meg replied calmly. Tony was stunned. "All right," Stephen answered. He grabbed the 13 spice crayfish and said to Tony, "Don't underestimate Mr. Mac's spicy crayfish. You will regret it." "Heh, so what? I'm a demon who has tasted the whole roasted lamb with volcanic chili on Volcano Island. Can't I handle a mere spicy crayfish?" Tony said with a relaxed expression as if he didn't take Steve's words to heart. However, he still chose to eat the 13 spice crayfish first after hesitating for a while. Compared to the mild and concentrated aroma of the minced garlic, the 13 spice crayfish aroma was more complex and layered. It was the aroma of many spices that were mixed into the same crayfish. When a chef was cooking, the most taboo thing to do was to mess things up. Not only would that ruin the taste of the food itself, but it would also cause the taste of the food to become strange due to the conflicting smells. On the Demon Islands, the chefs mostly used 3 or 4 kinds of spices which were very common. They were mostly used to remove the fishy smell and simple seasoning so that the seafood that was fished out from the sea and the wild animals that were produced on the island could bring out their own fresh taste to the greatest extent. However, Meg had added 13 or even more spices and condiments to such a small crayfish. This was really unbelievable. Tony took a whiff of the fragrance and frowned slightly. Other than confirming that there should be sea salt here, he couldn't tell what any of the spices were. For a food critic who claimed to have an excellent sense of smell, this made him feel a little frustrated. However, the large number of spices didn't make the aroma chaotic or difficult to accept. If one carefully sensed it, they would have a wonderful sense of being attracted by it step by step. It's very difficult to distinguish whether the chef randomly combined the flavors or intentionally created such a wonderful taste. As for whether he can guarantee that he can make the same taste every time, that's a greater test of the chef's ability. Tony was deep in thought. He also broke off the crayfish's head and removed the shell, revealing the plump crayfish roe. Then, he took a bite. The plump crayfish roe was already soaked in the broth. The fresh crayfish roe collided with the complex aroma. At first, the taste buds were slightly uncomfortable, as if they didn't know what taste to send to the brain first. Then, the spices seemed to have reached some kind of agreement. All kinds of flavors began to appear on the scene and began to bloom with their own wonderful taste. Numbing, spicy, fresh, fragrant, sweet, tender. A surprising battle was going on in the mouth. Without any suspense, Tony was completely defeated. At this moment, he finally acknowledged the boss's words. There were definitely no less than 13 spices in it, and there would only be more. Moreover, the rich taste and the surprising layering all displayed the chef's extraordinary memory of spices. After swallowing, the fragrance lingered in the mouth. One mouthful after another, it was so delicious that he couldn't stop. Tony was already on his knees at the sight of the 13 fragrances that could make one fall into depravity. This 13-spice crayfish is not inferior to the garlic crayfish. No one on the Demon Islands can beat it. Tony gave a thumbs up. Then, he skillfully peeled the crayfish shell and ate the crayfish meat that was soaked in the 13-spice broth. After eating, the fragrance lingered in his mouth and teeth. After eating the 13-spice crayfish, Tony's gaze was fixed on the last spicy crayfish. The garlic crayfish and 13-spice crayfish had already brought him too many surprises. The mild garlic crayfish and the rich 13-spice crayfish had already satisfied all his imagination about crayfish. What was so special about this spicy crayfish? In fact, he didn't have much expectation in his heart. After all, it was already very difficult for a chef to have an amazing specialty dish. Such a chef usually couldn't do anything well if he wanted to do everything well. Indeed, spicy crayfish is my favorite. Steve had already grabbed the spicy crayfish and was eating it with relish. He was panting heavily, and found a gap to take a sip of cold beer. Then, he let out a long sigh of relief. The satisfaction on his face made the corners of everyone's lips curl up uncontrollably. Is it that exaggerated? Tony was skeptical. He also reached out to grab the crayfish, peeled the back of the crayfish, and took out a piece of meat. He dipped it in the red broth, and took a big bite. The numbness and spiciness bloomed on the tip of his tongue. It was a taste that was even more explosive than the 13-spice crayfish. It made his tired taste buds, which had been active for a long time, soar instantly and began to cater to the spiciness crazily. Tony's face turned red immediately. There were very few demons on the Demon Islands that liked spicy food, so he wasn't good at eating spicy food. However, as a professional gourmet, ordinary spicy food wouldn't make him have much of a reaction. However, this numbing and spicy feeling was like a needle that suddenly pierced his buttocks, giving him a jolt. The numbness on the tip of his tongue didn't last for long. After chewing on the crayfish meat that had absorbed the spicy broth, the fresh and fragrant spiciness began to appear, bringing an incomparable wonderful experience. SSS. 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 After swallowing a mouthful of crayfish meat, Tony panted heavily. Apart from the delicious taste, the numbness and spiciness were his strongest feelings. Fine beads of sweat had already appeared on his forehead. This was an intense taste that he had never experienced before. It was even more intense than the bloody roasted pig trotter yesterday. At times like this, a mouthful of cold beer is the best. Steve raised his glass and gestured. Then, he tilted his head back and took a big gulp. Oh, right. Wine. Tony's eyes lit up, and he also picked up the glass on the table. The glass that had a black stone texture was cold to the touch, making him feel refreshed. He couldn't wait to take a big gulp. SSS. A sound automatically sounded in his mind. Awesome. Tony exclaimed. Chapter 1350. Boss, from today onwards, you're the king of crayfish on the Demon Islands. After eating 3 crayfish and drinking 2 large glasses of beer, Tony stood up and looked at Meg with admiration. His eyes were sparkling as though he was looking at a beautiful lady. Meg frowned slightly and was a little wary of Tony's gay gaze. I'm Tony Moody, an unknown gourmet. After eating the crayfish that you made today, I've decided to write a story about you and the crayfish. I wonder if you're willing to cooperate a little? Tony explained with a smile. Tony was quite confident in his name. On the Demon Islands, as long as it was a restaurant or delicacy that he had reviewed, it would basically be able to lead a trend and bring fame and money to the chef and restaurant. As expected. Meg understood. He didn't guess wrongly. This demon was indeed a food critic. However, he didn't have the time or interest to cooperate with his work. He said with a stupefied expression, "The story about me and the crayfish? Are there any special feelings between an executioner and a death row prisoner?" Tony was stunned. It was the first time he had heard of such a novel description. However, after thinking about it carefully, the relationship between a chef who made a living by slaughtering and cooking crayfish was indeed like the relationship between an executioner and a death row prisoner. No. I just want to know why you would think of cooking crayfish in such a strange way. It completely subverts the conventional way of cooking seafood and makes seafood different. For example, this minced garlic, 13 spice, and this spicy and refreshing marciao. How did these unique ideas come about? Tony shook his head and realized that Meg had led the question astray. Maybe you don't know much about seafood. This is just a conventional operation. Meg glanced at Tony and said indifferently. Tony choked. As a gourmet who was known as the one who knew seafood the best, he was actually told that he didn't know much about seafood. This feeling was really too sullen. Meg didn't continue chatting with Tony. After putting the crayfish into the pot, he held the big spatula and moved between the 3 pots. Although he was at ease, he didn't have much time to chat with the customer. Sit down, sit down. In front of a real chef, we have to hold it in even if we don't like it. Steve smiled and pushed Tony back to his seat. He couldn't hide the smile on his face. As a good friend of many years, he knew how proud Tony was of his title. Today, when he saw Tony's defeated look, he was in a good mood. He couldn't wait to tell his bad friends. At most, he would say that I don't know anything about shrimps. How can he say that I don't know anything about seafood? That's an unreasonable inference. Tony sat down and muttered unhappily. Before tasting the crayfish, the number 1 prawn in his heart was the king mantis prawn of Pai Pai Island. An 8th-tier flaming demon commander stood on a rock high up, and shouted loudly. The flames on his body lit up his sinister smile. All these years, the flaming demons had been surrounding and chasing the lava demons, and they finally found this secret base in the fog at the edge of the Demon Islands. The lava demons were already very weak, and it was said that there wasn't even a 6th-tier lava demon. They used to be a powerful existence among the top 10 demon races, but now they couldn't even be compared to some of the weaker races, let alone the flaming demons who were at their peak. Therefore, they were here tonight to completely exterminate the lava demons, and wipe out this fire elemental demon race that used to be above the flaming demons forever. The Holy Lava Order. As long as I can find it, my status in the race will be raised to another level. That commander looked at the lava demons who were struggling hard, but had no ability to resist at all. The intelligence was right. They were just a weak race that didn't even have a 6th-tier demon. Sir, our boat has been burned. Right at this moment, a panicked voice sounded from behind that commander. That commander was stunned. He turned his head and saw that the wooden boat that they had docked at the port was burning with a raging fire. What made his expression change even more was the meteors in the sky that were hurtling towards them with red tails behind them. Chapter 1351. The flame demons, who were 10 times more powerful than the lava demons, forced the old and weak lava demons to the flat ground in the center of the island. If it weren't for the orders from above, these stubborn lava demons would have been killed by them long ago. The lava demons with lava flowing through their bodies leaned on each other. They didn't show any fear as they looked at the flaming demons engulfed in flames. In fact, they didn't even have any special expressions. They were like a bunch of hard, stinky rocks. The flaming demons' expressions gradually became angry. Their disdainful expressions were even more depressing than verbal mockery. They were clearly the victorious ones, and they were going to wipe this weak race off the face of the Norland continent. Balls of flames began to burn on the flaming demons' bodies. They only had to wait for an order, and they could burn all the lava demons to death. No one would be able to save them. The lava demons clearly knew this outcome, but their expressions didn't change. They stood still while supporting each other. "Look, Great Elder, it's a meteor." Right at this moment, a young lava demon suddenly pointed to the sky. All the lava demons raised their heads and looked at the meteors that were falling towards the small island. Their eyes lit up as the red flames left long trails in the sky. That's the falling stars." The aged lava fiend called out in a trembling voice as he leaned on his walking stick. Tears were already welling up in his eyes. Falling stars. All the lava demons were in an uproar. Their expressions gradually became fanatical. This was one of the lava demons' long-lost battle techniques. It was said that only 8th-tier lava demons could summon meteors and use them as their own weapons. In other words, someone among the lava demons had already become an 8th-tier demon. Ever since the lava demons' decline, the 6th tier had become an insurmountable threshold. For hundreds of years, only a few prodigies had been able to break through to the 6th tier. However, the 6th tier was only the weakest race on the Demon Islands. Hence, they could only hide on a secret island in the mist. They didn't expect to be found by the flaming demons. But now, their reinforcements were here. And it was an 8th-tier lava demon that hadn't appeared for many years. "It must be Sargeras and the others," a demon shouted. The lava demons looked even more expectant. The expressions of the flame demons surrounding the lava demon changed when they saw the meteor whizzing over. They had never experienced such a terrifying battle skill that could summon a meteor from the starry sky and use it as a weapon. They did not know how to deal with it at that moment. "Kill them!" The Inferno demon commander standing on the cliff shouted. Bang! However, before he could finish his words, a thick iron rod had already smashed down from above his head. The iron rod that was almost as thick as his head smashed him into a meat patty from head to toe. The flames rising from his body were extinguished with a puff. "Boss is dead." The Inferno demons looked at the tall lava demon on the cliff. Rong Yang was like an active volcano that could erupt at any time. He killed the level 8 Inferno demon with one blow. Burning Legion, charge! Sargeras stood where the commander had been, and pointed the iron staff in his hand downward as he yelled. Charge! Dozens of lava demons with lava all over their bodies rushed out, and jumped down fearlessly towards the Inferno demons at the foot of the mountain. At the same time, the meteor with a huge red tail smashed down under the fearful gazes of the Inferno demons. Boom! Boom! Following a series of explosions, the meteors exploded in the midst of the Inferno demons. The demons in the center were smashed into the ground directly, and the demons nearby were also blasted away by the huge impact. The Inferno demons, who were originally aggressive, were instantly in a mess. Countless demons died under the impact of the meteors. Even if they did not die, they lost all will to fight and fled in panic. On the contrary, the Burning Legion's charge was extremely disciplined and aggressive. They were like wolves that had charged into a flock of sheep, killing the Inferno demons crazily. They tore apart the Inferno demons' line of defense, and then chased after the fleeing demons. The lava demons, who were originally surrounded, were overjoyed when they saw this scene. They were already tearing up. They had been bullied for God knows how many years. Even the weak races that were once seen as ants dared to step on them. But now, the Burning Legion had returned with a strong momentum and defeated the Inferno demons. They could finally hold their heads high for once. Great Elder, are you all right? Sargeras slammed the iron staff in his hand on the ground, and went forward to ask that old lava demon. We're fine. The Great Elder shook his head, and reached out his trembling hand to gently touch the lava flowing on Sargeras' chest. The scorching temperature made his fingers turn red, but he didn't care at all. His eyes became brighter, and his expression was full of surprise. Sargeras, you really broke through to 8th tier, he exclaimed. Yes, and I should be able to break through to 9th tier soon. Sargeras nodded, and smiled confidently. It's about the distance of 1,000 holy Rugiamos. Huh! All the lava demons were stunned. They did not understand what Sargeras meant. Since when could the difference in strength be described with Rugiamos? Sargeras did not explain further, and asked the Great Elder, we'll talk about this later. Great Elder, is there any problem at the lava pool? There's no problem. They haven't had time to search yet. The Great Elder nodded. Then let's make a trip there. Maybe some things will see the light of day again. Sargeras nodded, and strode toward the active volcano on the west side of the island. Tell me, how should we kill her so that Simmons, that fool, will fight Alfred to the death the moment he sees her? In the small room on the balcony of the restaurant, Meg looked at Charlene, who was wrapped into a ball of sand and had a ball of cloth stuffed in her mouth, and asked. That's easy. Strip her naked and throw her onto the island. Create a scene where she died after being tortured. With Simmons's intelligence and his love for this woman, he would probably fight Alfred to the death immediately, Irina said with a smile. That's right. You can just strip her naked and throw her onto the island. Millimeter. Millimeter. Charlene's eyes widened, and her body began to tremble violently. Her eyes were full of fear. Bam! The door of the room closed, and the small room returned to silence and darkness. Are you going to set up the scene now? Irina asked Meg. We're not the main characters, so we have to set up the stage for them. Without some foreplay, it's not good for them to come up with sparks flying everywhere. Meg said with a smile. It was time for this big show to start. He raised his hand, and RZ landed quietly. Chapter 1352. The Griffin's giant wings glided over Carapace Island. Meg, who was sitting on the Griffin's back, was playing with the head in his hand. Her charming face was still pitiful, and her delicate cherry lips were slightly open. She didn't look like she died peacefully. Of course, this wasn't Charlene's head. Otherwise, Meg wouldn't be able to hold it in his hand so calmly. This was a head that the system had created based on Charlene's model and 3D printed according to a 1:1 ratio. It was very realistic in both size and appearance. Even the skin's degree of simulation had reached 9.5%. It would even turn red when one pinched it. System, I have a bold idea. Meg looked at the head in his hand and said with a strange expression, I think you should change your profession. As a professional master chef system, this system is deeply involved in the gourmet industry. Why would I need to change my profession? Look at your skills. It's a pity that you don't make simulation companion dolls. It would be even better if you added a little AI system to allow simple interactions, Meg said with a smile. Does the host have any requests? If necessary, the system can create a 1:1 replica of this ghost mother, as well as a personality system. Other than the fact that it doesn't have a real life, there are almost no differences in other aspects. It can move freely and has good flexibility. Heh, do I look like someone who needs this kind of thing? Meg sneered. Judging from the host's performance after coming to this world, you do need it. Meg raised his eyebrows. Although the nightlife was a little boring, at least he had a wife. He didn't expect himself to be mocked by the system. He said coldly, Shut up, you single dog system. The griffin flew towards West Point Island and circled in the sky. After confirming that there was no one below, it immediately dove down and landed on the beach at the northeast corner. Meg jumped down from the griffin's back. He dug a hole on the beach with the small shovel that he carried with him according to the system's measurement of the best tide. After measuring the depth with a tape measure, he buried Charlene's head in and covered it with sand again. The tide surged up and washed away the excess sand. The beach looked like it had returned to its original state. System, are you sure that the tide will be able to flush this head out at this time tomorrow night? Meg asked worriedly as he returned to the griffin's back. Host, please be at ease. According to this system's strict calculations, starting from 5 o'clock tomorrow evening, this head will gradually emerge from the beach. Furthermore, this system has installed an ejection device inside this head. If the situation changes, the host can also remotely eject it from the beach. That's good. Meg nodded. Suddenly, he looked warily in the southwest direction. He twitched a few times in a pool of blood and stopped breathing completely. The king of succubi. The succubus' eyes lit up. Take your things and follow me, Angela said to the succubus lying on the bed. Okay. The succubus replied. She quickly got up from the bed and picked up the cloth bag that had been placed aside. When she went out, she didn't forget to kick the demon. The strike of the succubus caused the dissatisfaction of many demons. On such a hot and dry night, they urgently needed a place to vent, but the succubus who usually stood at the door to attract guests closed the door. The demons didn't have much patience for this weak and unprotected race, so they began to kick the door and even took out their weapons to tear down the house. A figure holding a dagger appeared in the alley. It was a young succubus who was more beautiful than the ones they had seen before. The demons who were accumulating heat and had nowhere to vent turned around and revealed a covetous expression. Angela looked at these demons with a contemptuous smile. She blinked her eyes and activated the eyes of enchantment on them. The dagger flashed and slashed the throats of the demons, piercing their hearts. In the blink of an eye, the entire alley was bathed in blood. Sisters, follow me. Angela looked at the succubi who walked out of the room with small bags and said. She was the first to walk in the direction of the harbor. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1353. On Carapace Island, it wasn't a big deal for 1 or 2 demons to die. Such things happened every day. People would die silently in the dark night and be thrown into the sea with huge waves. Life would continue the next day, and no demons would care. Such things mostly happened on the outskirts of Carapace Island. No one cared about the lives of those demons who didn't have the money to buy protective amulets. However, if such things happened in the center of the island, and there were dozens of demons with protective amulets that died at the same time, then it wasn't a small matter. 10 King's Palace, which was badly battered by the theft, rushed to Succubus Alley immediately after receiving the news. Then, they saw a floor full of demon corpses. All the demons were killed in one hit. Their hearts and throats were killed in a very professional way. A vampire squatted down and observed for a while before saying, "Their eyes are unfocused. They should have been killed by the succubus while they were in a trance. Moreover, they died in the hands of the same succubus. All the succubi in Succubus Alley have disappeared," someone reported quickly. A Shivara shouted, "What are these lowly fellows doing? Capture them all and interrogate them. See if they have anything to do with the theft. I can smell blood. Follow me." A pair of black bat wings spread out behind that vampire, and a thin red line of light appeared in his vision. He flapped his wings and flew up. He looked in the direction of the harbor and was just about to speak. Bam! Out of nowhere, a brick suddenly flew out and hit the vampire in the head. The vampire's head tilted to one side and he immediately crashed. He fell to the ground and lost consciousness. Who? The demons of 10 King's Palace were shocked. Someone actually dared to attack the people of 10 King's Palace right under their noses. The 8th grade Shivara who spoke earlier jumped onto the roof at the side and looked around, but he still couldn't find out who did it. It must be those bitches. Continue searching. The Shivara shouted angrily. He ordered the demons to split up and chase after the succubi. Boom! Right at this moment, a huge mushroom cloud rose from the center of Carapace Island again, and the entire island shook again. Shit, it's from Ten Kings Palace. The Shivaras and the Ten Kings Palace's demons' expressions changed drastically. It was the same explosion, and at almost the same location. Could it be that that fellow had returned? The demons could no longer be bothered to pursue the succubus as they hurriedly gathered in the direction of the Ten Kings Palace. Angela, who was leading the succubi to the beach, looked back at the mushroom cloud rising from the center of Carapace Island, and her expression lit up. It seemed like they were in luck. The Ten Kings Palace was targeted by that mysterious expert again. Angela had only worked for half a day, and she left just like that. She was the employee with the shortest working period in his restaurant. She left with her sisters, so I couldn't stop them. Then forget it. Meg nodded. It seemed like Angela had already contacted all the succubi and successfully brought them away from Carapace Island. This was also a good thing for her. How's the setup going over there? Irina asked. It's almost done. Tomorrow night, when the snipe and the clam fight, let's be the fisherman. Meg nodded with a smile. Sounds pretty interesting. Irina's eyes lit up, and she looked like she was eager to give it a try. There were only small fishes and shrimps on Carapace Island, so it wasn't fun to play with them. However, it was different when it came to Alfred and Simmons. They were two big fishes. Crayfish, oh crayfish. The peak of my career depends on you. Tony, who had just woken up in the middle of the night, couldn't fall back asleep after going to the toilet. He simply lit the oil lamp and sat in front of the table. He took out a pen and paper and started writing. The wine and the delicious crayfish tonight gave him endless inspiration. The wonderful taste that he had never experienced before was enough for him to write about. After calming down, he picked up the pen and started writing. The birth of a legend, the king of shrimp kings. Chapter 1354. After 5 years, the Ten Kings Palace lost all its halls again. The representatives of the 10 major tribes gathered in front of the ruins. They looked at each other and fell into an eerie silence as they watched the injured being carried out. I heard that Irina should be in Chaos City now, right? A pale vampire said in a hoarse voice. I wouldn't be surprised if she appeared anywhere. Just like 5 years ago, she suddenly appeared on Carapace Island, smashed down the Ten Kings Palace, and then took the vault, an elderly spatial demon said in a low voice. All the demons' expressions changed when they heard that. They were aggrieved and furious. But she's already ransacked the treasury and even destroyed 5 halls. Why did she come back and destroy the remaining 5 halls today? Isn't she being unreasonable? A fear demon said with an aggrieved expression, as if he was a little wife who had been bullied. All the demons were enraged. They couldn't understand why the remaining 5 halls would be destroyed when there was nothing valuable left in the Ten Kings Palace. Perhaps, she just doesn't like us, a demon standing at the side said softly. All the demons fell into silence again. This reason sounded too convincing, and they couldn't refute it. What do we do now? Irina has targeted our Ten Kings Palace time and time again. She killed demons, set fires, and stole money. She doesn't respect the 10 major tribes at all. Let's go to war with the elves. Otherwise, we won't be able to vent our anger, a Shivara said angrily. A few other demon representatives agreed immediately. They couldn't tolerate the fact that the Ten Kings Palace had been destroyed twice. Irina is no longer the princess of the elves. If we go to war with the elves, won't we be helping her? The vampire said with a cold smile. Moreover, although we all think that Irina did it, did anyone see her with their own eyes? Did she leave any obvious evidence? If not, how can we say that she did it? That vampire continued. All the demons quietened down gradually. They really didn't know where to seek revenge now, so they could only hold it in. Since the Ten Kings Palace has been pushed over, I need to return to the clan to report the situation. As for whether we will continue to set up an office on Carapace Island, the clan will decide. A pair of black wings appeared on the vampire's back. With a flap of his wings, He quickly disappeared into the dark sky. Cowardly rats, we can't count on them. The abyssal demon looked at the vampire's back and spat. He then looked at the fiends and said, we abyssal demons will never let Irina off easily. We'll make her pay for what she's done. That's right. We Shivaras won't suffer such a loss, no matter who she is. The destruction of the Ten Kings Palace was undoubtedly the most important matter on Carapace Island. However, to most of the demons, these things had nothing to do with them. As long as the protective amulet of the Ten Kings Palace was still useful and Carapace Island hadn't sunk to the bottom of the sea, the most important thing for them to do every day when they woke up was to work hard and earn enough money to buy a protective amulet before the next month so that they could continue to live a safer life. It was never easy to earn money on Carapace Island, so survival became a difficult task. However, in the recent few days, if you want to get rich, be a crayfish hunter. This sentence gradually spread on Carapace Island. The crayfish that cost 50 copper coins each became a new shortcut for the demons on Carapace Island to get rich. It was said that some demons had already earned thousands or even tens of thousands of copper coins in just 2 to 3 days. This was something that most demons couldn't imagine. Therefore, even though the demons of the Ten Kings Palace searched the island strictly, they still couldn't stop the enthusiasm of the crayfish hunters. The beach was almost filled with demons. People were rummaging through every rock that could possibly hide crayfish. Some even jumped into the sea to search. Meg, who created this era of crayfish hunting, wrote a notice in his study after waking up early in the morning. You plan to share the crayfish recipe? Irina appeared behind Meg without him noticing. She glanced at the notice on the table, and was a little surprised. Yes. It's better to share it with others than to share it alone. After we leave, the residents of Carapace Island and the Demon Islands won't be able to eat the delicious crayfish anymore. How tragic would that be? Meg nodded with a smile. I didn't see you publicizing any recipes when we were in Chaos City, Irina said doubtfully. We have to earn money in Chaos City, so we'll just treat it as doing charity here. Meg smiled as he put down his pen and looked at the crooked handwriting that he had forced himself to write. The content was very simple. From today onwards, he would recruit 10 apprentices and teach them how to cook crayfish. The teaching time would be 3 days, and the fee would be 500 copper coins. This 500 copper coins was a symbolic fee to weed out those fellows who had the idea of signing up casually. Furthermore, he would still screen out these 10 apprentices, so he wouldn't just accept anyone. According to the agreement with the system, he needed to increase the popularity of crayfish, and let the demons on the Demon Islands maintain the habit of eating crayfish. Now, the popularity of crayfish was slowly spreading on Carapace Island. However, if he wanted to maintain the popularity or expand his influence, he had to form a certain degree of industrial cluster effect. Having more crayfish restaurants on Carapace Island was the simplest way. It was 8 a.m., and it was time to purchase crayfish again. Meg went out with the notice, and got a shock when he saw the line that stretched out for hundreds of meters. Chapter 1355. Kitar had a thoughtful expression on his face. Hearing the urging of the demons behind him, he had no choice but to move to the side. He didn't go far, and just watched Meg collect the crayfish and pay. There were so many people catching crayfish now, and he was only able to catch 20 crayfish in one night even though he was putting in so much effort. Moreover, the more he caught, the fewer the number of crayfish he caught. Sooner or later, he would run out of crayfish and could only become a poor fisherman again, barely making ends meet. But if he learned how to make crayfish, it would be different. Look at the boss. He collected thousands of crayfish a day and earned 50 copper coins per crayfish. That was tens of thousands of copper coins a day. Although he didn't understand business, he could still tell who earned more. After Meg finished collecting all the crayfish, Kitar came forward and helped Meg pour the crayfish into the pond while saying, "Boss, do you think I can do it? I want to learn how to make crayfish from you." You. Meg put down the crayfish basket and seriously sized up Kitar. This young demon fisherman was part of the first batch of crayfish hunters. He was very enthusiastic and had caught far more crayfish than ordinary fishermen in the past 2 days. Meg nodded and said, "If you are interested, you can try." "Really?" Kitar's eyes lit up. He had only wanted to give it a try, but he didn't expect Meg to really agree. "If you want to learn, I hope you come with a serious attitude. I don't want to waste time on an unserious demon." Meg looked at Kitar and said seriously, "Yes, I will definitely learn seriously." Kitar quickly nodded. He reached into his pocket and took out his money pouch. He counted out 5 gold coins and handed them to Meg solemnly. "Go back and take a bath first, then come back around 10, Meg said after taking the gold coins. "Okay." Kitar nodded, but he wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, he helped Meg pour the rest of the crayfish into the pond before leaving. His clothes were soaked in seawater and were covered in mud. He really should go back and wash them properly. 4 or 5 more demons came over to inquire, but Meg politely rejected 2 of them. He then asked the other 3 to pay the tuition fee of 500 copper coins and come over at 10 o'clock as well. "Boss Hades, are you really planning to teach others how to cook crayfish?" Ivan popped his head out from the neighboring courtyard and looked at Meg in surprise. How could Hades be willing to teach others such a good business? "Yes." Meg nodded with a smile. "It seems that everyone likes crayfish. If I teach more demons how to make crayfish, then more demons will be able to taste the delicious crayfish." Ivan looked back into the house and whispered to Meg, "Can I learn it? Do you think I can do it?" Meg looked at Ivan. He had a good impression of the family of 3 rock demons next door. However, although rock demons were powerful, they had always been known for their clumsiness. Although it was not depressing to let Ivan operate the cauldron, whether he could meet the requirements was a problem. "I'm not a fast learner, but I'm very patient. As long as you're willing to teach me, I'll definitely be able to learn." Ivan patted his chest and promised. He looked back at the house again and lowered his voice. "My son and I have fallen in love with the crayfish you made. Moreover, after eating the crayfish you made, we have started to change our shells. If I can learn how to make it, my status in the family will definitely skyrocket and I will be able to stand tall in front of my wife." Meg looked at Ivan. Out of pity for a pitiful man without a family status, he nodded with a smile. "All right then. It's also 10 o'clock. Come over later." "Okay." Ivan's face lit up with joy. He bent down and groped under the first pillar of the fence for a while. Soon, he pulled out a stone. He broke the stone and a few shiny gold coins rolled out from it. "You know, it's not easy to hide some private money." Ivan took out 5 gold coins, put the remaining one into his pocket, and passed it to Meg, who was still in shock. I know. Meg took the money and was still a little surprised. This brother is also a talent, but why do I feel so pitiful? Ivan sighed and said earnestly, "Sigh, boss, you're still young. You must remember to save more private money while you still have some status in the family." Meg wanted to laugh, but he had to hold it in. He was thinking of how to respond. "Hey, come in and help me dry my clothes." A grumpy voice came from the house next door. Ivan's expression fell. He waved at Meg and turned to walk into the house. He immediately put on a smile when he reached the door, and even his footsteps became lighter. Looking at Ivan's back, Meg mumbled to himself, "Why does it seem like it's better to be single sometimes?" Meg's notice attracted the attention of many demons. The booming business of the crayfish these few days made many people jealous. On Carapace Island, some demons had calculated that the crayfish restaurant could earn at least 50,000 copper coins a day. This was a huge sum of money, and no restaurant had ever made so much money. Meg would rather go without than have something substandard. Thus, he only managed to gather a total of 6 apprentices before 10 o'clock. "Honey, the boss next door is starting his lesson. I'll go take a look. Maybe the people who will save us rock trolls will fall into my hands," Ivan said carefully as he pinched Gemina's thick calves and peeked at her expression. "You want to learn how to cook? Are you complaining that my turtle stew is disgusting?" Gemina's sharp gaze landed on Ivan immediately. "How can that be? Honey's turtle stew is the most delicious food in the world." Ivan hurriedly shook his head, and then said seriously, "But I'm thinking that if we go to Mr. Mac's place to eat crayfish, it'll cost 100 copper coins each. If I can learn how to cook it, it'll be a lot more cost-effective no matter if we catch crayfish ourselves or buy them from those crayfish hunters. If we can gather our clansmen to catch crayfish and let me cook them, wouldn't it be easy for us rock trolls to walk the path of revival? What you said seems to make some sense." Jemina revealed a pondering expression. "Father, bring me along too. I want to be a chef, too. I want to learn how to cook crayfish too." Justin, who was in charge of massaging Jemina's shoulders, said excitedly as he moved his head forward. "You're not allowed to go." Jemina knocked Justin back, and then said to Ivan, "You go." "All right." Ivan's face lit up, and he hurriedly got up and walked out of the house. Just as he reached the door, he said regretfully, "If I knew my wife would agree so easily, I wouldn't have used my own private savings to pay for the tuition fees. Now that the money is gone, I have to think about how to explain where the money came from." Chapter 1356. Cooking a delicious crayfish dish was not an easy task. Even someone as talented as Meg, crossed out, was still tortured in the test field for the god of cookery. He only learned it after going through hardships. Giving a group of demons a 3-day crash course to learn how to cook crayfish was not an easy task. Therefore, after Meg recruited 10 members for the crash course, he divided them into 3 groups of 3, 3, 4, and 3 groups. Each group would learn a different crayfish flavor. Furthermore, it was not the complete version, but the castrated crash course. Of course, the castrating was also a technical castrating. He removed some spices that were hard to find on the Demon Islands and replaced them with some locally produced spices. Then, he simplified some of the cooking steps so that the cooking process would be simpler without affecting the crayfish's taste and texture. 13 Spice Crayfish. Kitar was rather happy when he heard his group. Although he could only learn one crayfish recipe, he believed that there would be customers who would like it as long as he could learn it. "I didn't expect it to be spicy crayfish. I love spicy crayfish the most." Ivan also mumbled excitedly. The spicy and refreshing spicy crayfish had already become his favorite. If he could learn how to cook it, it might become a popular delicacy among the rock demons. The other demons were also looking forward to it. Many of them were customers of the crayfish restaurant. They had tasted the deliciousness of the crayfish and were addicted to it. After seeing the notice, they came with the intention of giving it a try. If they could really learn it, they would have a very good skill no matter if it was on Carapace Island or another island. Meg gestured for everyone to quieten down before walking to the pool. He grabbed a crayfish from inside, and said, "All right, the groups are done. Now, let's talk about how to cook crayfish. The first step is to clean and process the crayfish. First, we have to put the purchased crayfish into clear water to rest for a few hours." Meg spent a lot of time explaining and demonstrating how to process the crayfish alone, including cleaning, opening the back, and removing the crayfish lines. The processing of ingredients was the beginning of a gourmet dish, and it was also the most important cornerstone. Although it was a crash course, Meg had no intention of fooling around. After all, when these apprentices went out in the future, they would carry his name. He didn't want his reputation to be ruined so easily. As if sensing Meg's serious attitude, the demon apprentices listened very seriously as well. Some of them even took out notebooks to record. Put the processed crayfish aside and marinate it with some ginger. Start preparing the required ingredients. First, let's see what ingredients we need for the spicy crayfish. Then, Meg began to formally teach him how to cook crayfish. Chili was relatively easy to obtain on the Demon Islands, but Sichuan pepper was extremely rare or even non-existent. However, if the spicy crayfish did not have Sichuan pepper, it would be equivalent to losing half of its soul. Therefore, he could only negotiate with the system to buy a batch of Sichuan pepper from him and then resell it to other demons. Then, he would give them some Sichuan pepper seeds and let them cultivate it themselves. As for garlic crayfish, it was much simpler. Although most demons didn't like to eat garlic, garlic wasn't precious and wasn't rare. Furthermore, It was very simple to grow and cultivate. As for 13 spice, that was Meg's biggest problem. It was obviously impossible to provide 13 spice powder directly to all the demons. After a few days, it would be a long journey. It would be impossible for him to become a stable supplier and customer. Meg could only choose a dozen spices from the common spices on the demon islands. Then, he mixed them according to the system's recommended dosage and his own experience to create a 13-spice version of this world. To be honest, the 13-spice version lacked some special spices, so its aroma and taste were slightly worse. However, the aroma was still considered rich, and it achieved the characteristics of spicy, fresh, fragrant, and sweet. As a remade 13-spice version, it was already considered excellent. Meg only taught how to cook the spicy crayfish until lunchtime started. "Do you understand?" Meg looked at Ivan and the other two demons and asked. "Yes, my eyes have learned it." Ivan nodded honestly. The other two demons also scratched their heads embarrassedly. Although the boss taught them very seriously and carefully, they only remembered the general steps. They still didn't have much confidence to actually do it themselves. "It's all right. Learning how to cook starts with your eyes. You still have 3 days. As long as you learn seriously, you will definitely be able to learn it." Meg smiled and glanced at the time. "If you have nothing to do at noon, just watch me cook the crayfish at the side. What I'm teaching you is a slightly simplified version. As for the complete method, you can learn it yourself. How much you can learn will depend on your own abilities." All the demons' eyes lit up when they heard that. They all expressed that they had nothing to do and could stay to continue learning. The lunchtime was as busy as usual. As the crayfish restaurant's reputation grew, more and more demons on Carapace Island heard that the crayfish here was selling for 100 copper coins each, and there was still an endless stream of customers. They all came with curious thoughts. Tony and Steve also came to the crayfish restaurant. After staying up late to write the article, Tony only woke up at noon. After he woke up, he dragged Steve to the crayfish restaurant and said that he needed to eat crayfish to find inspiration before going back to polish the article. "Steve, you might not believe it, but after I finished writing that article last night, I felt like I had reached the peak of my life. I might not be able to write another article as good as this in my lifetime." Tony stared at Steve with a pair of dark circles under his eyes. He looked at Steve excitedly. "If you get a bonus for this month's article, you have to treat me to a trip," Steve said with a chuckle. "Sure. If this column can become popular, just tell me where you want to go and what you want to eat," Tony promised as he patted his chest. "You said it yourself. Don't blame me for being rude when the time comes." Meg was swimming in between the 3 big woks and cooking crayfish with 3 different flavors at the same time with ease. The 10 demon apprentices stood not far away and stared at him seriously. Their gazes were gradually filled with admiration, and their faces were filled with amazement. "Look, Mother. It says that if you want to register as an apprentice, you have to pay 500 copper coins. Did Father hide money behind your back again?" Justin and Jemina arrived at the crayfish restaurant. When they entered, Justin stopped in his tracks and looked at the notice pasted on the door, and asked curiously, "Ha, he's dead." Jemina sneered as she stared at Ivan in the courtyard. Ivan, who was watching Meg cook crayfish with relish, suddenly shuddered. He raised his head to look outside instinctively, and met Jemina's murderous gaze. His expression changed slightly as he suddenly realized something. He shuffled behind Meg and softly said, "Boss Hades, can I ask you for a favor?" Chapter 1357. Meg sympathized with a married man's desire to survive, so he agreed to Ivan's request for him to cover up his lie. After the lunch service ended, Meg said to Jemina, who was holding onto the railing and staring at Ivan with a smile, "Miss Jemina, Mr. Ivan said that he wants to learn how to cook crayfish from me. I think he has great potential, so I accepted him. However, he has to pay 500 copper coins for the registration fee. I heard from him that you are the one who controls the finances. I wonder if you have the money to give me." "He hasn't handed the money to Mr. Hades yet." Jemina looked at Ivan suspiciously. What are you talking about, wife? Do I look like a demon who has 500 copper coins on me? Ivan patted his chest calmly. Because he used too much strength, he accidentally knocked out a gold coin. The gold coin shone brightly under the sun, and drew a beautiful parabola. It landed in front of Jemina with a ding, and spun on the ground. Ivan's expression and actions froze instantly. His gaze gradually turned fearful as he looked at the gold coin that was still spinning. Meg was also slightly taken aback. He looked at Ivan with pity. It seemed like this brother could only pray for himself. No, wife, listen to me. Ivan tried to struggle. Bam! Jemina stomped that gold coin into the rock, and then turned around to walk into the house. Her cold voice sounded, if you can't learn how to cook crayfish, then don't come back. Do you think I'm still half dead? Ivan tried to ask Meg. That depends on whether you can learn it. Meg couldn't help but laugh. Sigh, life. How did such an innocent and cute little girl become such a tigress? Ivan sighed. Life was really unpredictable. On the first day, Meg didn't let the demons cook. After all, the cost of a crayfish was 50 copper coins. If they practiced a few more times, he would suffer a loss. Therefore, he only let them do some basic cleaning work. After all, they couldn't even reach Meg's standards when it came to pulling out the lines. In the evening, Meg smiled at everyone, and said, "All right, today's class will end here. If you want to practice tomorrow, you can buy your own crayfish, or go to the beach tonight to try your luck. You will have the ingredients for cooking tomorrow." Although the demons were a little surprised, they didn't say much when they thought about the cost of the crayfish. 500 copper coins wasn't enough for them to try a few times. "Boss, can you draw a blueprint of this pot for me? I want to find a blacksmith to make a similar one so that I can practice at home," Kitar said to Meg after everyone had left. "Of course." Meg nodded. He took out a pen and paper, and quickly drew a blueprint of a wok for Kitar. This young fisherman was indeed very enthusiastic. He was always eager to do the work, and would also raise any questions he didn't understand. He could be considered a good apprentice. "Thank you, boss." Kitar kept the blueprint carefully, and thanked Meg before leaving excitedly. He felt that he had learned a lot of new things today, and had to go home to digest them properly. He also had to go catch some crayfish tonight. Because the demons from the 10 Kings Palace who came to investigate the crayfish restaurant were all buried, the crayfish restaurant was peaceful and quiet. At night, Meg closed the restaurant early with the reason that the crayfish were sold out. "Amy, your mother and I are going out tonight. Can you stay at home with Ugly Duckling and watch Cat and Mouse?" Meg took out a tablet from behind his back, and tapped on the screen to play the first episode of Cat and Mouse automatically. "Wow, there's a big blue-gray cat and a little brown mouse hiding in it." Amy stared at the screen curiously. "Meow." As if Ugly Duckling had seen its own kind, it also went up excitedly and snuggled into Amy's arms. "Let's go. I think they can watch it for the whole night." Meg turned to look at Irina. "Haha, that fat cat is so stupid. It's even stupider than Ugly Duckling." Irina was already squatting beside Amy, and she was laughing loudly. Meg, she was indeed an all-ages favorite. Meg sighed. He only dragged Irina away from the tablet after she finished watching the first episode. "How did you stuff Cat and Mouse into such a small thing?" Irina was still looking at Meg curiously as she sat on Aziz's back. "They're just images. They're not the real Cat and Mouse." Meg shook his head with a smile. This was a new toy he bought for Amy from the system for 10,000 copper coins, Cat and Mouse limited edition tablet. Although it could only watch Cat and Mouse, it was a cartoon with more than 100 levels, so it could be played on an infinite loop from any level without getting tired of it. It was undoubtedly the best toy to coax children. "Is it okay to let Amy stay in the restaurant alone?" Irina turned to look at Carapace Island. "It's okay. I've made some arrangements in the restaurant." Meg nodded. The restaurant's automatic defense system had already reached level 9. Amy only needed to stay at home and watch cartoons. There weren't any 10th tier powerhouses on Carapace Island now, anyway. Irina didn't ask any more questions after hearing that. She knew that Meg doted on Amy more than she did, so he wouldn't put her in danger. Furthermore, what they were going to do tonight might be very dangerous. It was indeed inconvenient to bring Amy along. The Griffin broke through the clouds and flew high up in the sky towards West Point Island. At this moment, Alfred was on a large ship heading towards West Point Island. There was only one crew member on the ship and a huge porcupine battle boar in the middle of the ship. Simmons better bring the demon statue with him. Otherwise, I'll definitely take the stone statue back even if I have to massacre the flaming tribe. Alfred clenched his fist. Terrifying black lines appeared on his face, and his eyes turned blood red. The abyssal demon rowing the boat at the stern looked at Alfred with fear in his eyes. The chief seemed a little different today. It was terrifying. On the other side, Simmons sat on the back of a flaming bird with a gloomy expression. The flames on their bodies almost burned half the sky. Although Alfred is known for his lust and brutality, why did he lure me here? The abyssal demon race and the flaming tribe both expressed that they want to restart the race war. What is he trying to do? Simmons mumbled to himself. He thought for a while, and a hint of anxiety appeared on his face. Charlene better be fine. Otherwise, I won't let him off today. The flaming bird quickly approached the sky above West Point Island from the northeast. Its speed and altitude started to decrease at the same time. Oh, it came earlier than expected. Looks like I still have to activate the ejection system. Meg sighed. Then, he took out a remote control from his pocket. He glanced at Alfred, who had already occupied the center of the island and was riding on the porcupine battle boar, as well as the flaming bird that was approaching the beach. He pressed the nuclear button. Chapter 1358. Demon Charlene, take aim and fire. As the system's demonic notification sounded, Charlene's head, which had already revealed a small part of her head, shot up and flew toward the incoming flaming bird. West Point Island was shrouded in darkness and fog, so visibility was not high. Simmons only saw a flash in front of his eyes as something flew toward him. He instinctively reached out and grabbed it. Just as he was about to mock Alfred's lame sneak attack, he suddenly looked at the thing he was grabbing. It was a head. Bright red blood flowed down from the head. With the help of the firelight, he could clearly see the appearance of the head. Thin lips, seductive eyes, and an expression of unwillingness and despair. Wasn't this his most beloved concubine, Charlene? Charlene! Simmons roared furiously. Just by looking at the face of despair before her death, he could imagine what kind of abuse and devastation she had suffered before her death. He originally thought that Alfred would not do anything to Charlene on account of him and the flaming demon tribe. He did not expect Alfred to be so ruthless. Alfred, I'm going to tear you into pieces. Flames rose from Simmons' palm and instantly turned the head into ashes. His body also suddenly grew a few meters taller, turning into a flame giant that was more than 4 meters tall. His entire body was burning with red flames, and his gaze was fixed on Alfred and the porcupine battle boar standing in the center of the island. He rode the flaming bird and charged downward like a flaming meteorite. At this moment, Alfred was also staring at the shattered half of the stone statue in front of him. He was in a daze. The black stone statue had already lost all its magic, and the remaining half of the power of the dead was nowhere to be found. Simmons, how dare you steal my power of the dead? Today, I will definitely kill you and eat you up to take back the other half of the power of the dead. Alfred suddenly raised his head, and his scarlet eyes stared at the flaming bird that was charging toward him. He used the broad axe to smack the porcupine battle boar's butt. The giant porcupine battle boar, which was more than 3 meters tall and nearly 10 meters long, started running with large strides. The entire West Point Island trembled as if it would sink at any moment. The flaming bird swooped down with raging flames and clashed with the porcupine battle boar that was as heavy as an abyss. The flaming bird opened its mouth and spat out a red flame that melted a trench in the ground. Even the rocks were burned to ashes. The thick spikes on the porcupine battle boar's neck shot out like a crossbow as it charged forward, turning into a dense rain of arrows that covered the flaming bird cage. The porcupine battle boar charged into the area, and its footsteps sank in the red magma. Its body, and white smoke, there was a scorched stench. As for the flaming bird, because it was diving at a low altitude, after spitting out flames, it no longer had the space to dodge the thick spikes. It was instantly pierced by several spikes and fell from the air. Simmons, and the flaming bird, Simmons, and Simmons, and Simmons. Simmons of the flaming bird battle boar. Simmons by Simmons the of the Simmons. Of Simmons flower. In the blink of an eye, it appeared in front of Alfred. There was a loud bang, accompanied by the three-colored flames. The entire West Point Island sank. With the explosion as the center, everything in the surroundings was reset. Could this be the long-lost Buddha's fury? Meg, who had caused this battle, mumbled to himself while holding a pair of binoculars in the sky. Is he dead? Irina, who was also holding a pair of high-powered binoculars, said in surprise, but Simmons' strength has indeed increased a little. I remember the last time I saw him, he only knew how to create 2 types of fireballs. Now, he has learned 3 types. Charlene, I've killed this guy and avenged you. Simmons, who was floating in the air with flames still burning on his body, looked down and said sadly, "Heh, you want to kill me with this little trick." Simmons, although you've absorbed the other half of the power of the dead, it seems like you haven't been recognized by Master. A cold voice sounded from below. The flames and smoke gradually dissipated. Alfred, who had his hands raised in front of him, appeared in their line of sight. Balls of black undead aura surrounded him like ribbons, dissipating most of the power of the previous attack. Although his clothes were torn to shreds, there weren't any obvious injuries on his body. He's not dead yet. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. Although he had expected Alfred, who had made a deal with the devil, to be more powerful, he was surprised that he wasn't seriously injured under such an attack. How? How is this possible? Simmons was also shocked. This was his strongest attack. Although Alfred was powerful, he shouldn't have been able to receive his attack so easily. Now, it's my turn. A red light flashed in Alfred's scarlet eyes. He slowly raised the black axe, and the black undead aura instantly wrapped around it, forming a huge black skull above the axe. Simmons looked at the black skull, and suddenly thought of something. He exclaimed, "Alfred, have you already surrendered to the devil? It's too late to play dumb now. I'll kill you and then eat you," Alfred said coldly, and then swung his axe down. A black circular blade slashed towards Simmons, who was in mid-air. The huge black skull instantly split into countless small skulls and charged towards Simmons along with the circular blade. It was a black mass. You've made a deal with the devil. You'll become the enemy of the entire world. Simmons roared loudly, and his body retreated rapidly. At the same time, he took out a bracelet of inferno beads from his hand and threw it down. The bracelet spread out, and the 10 inferno beads formed a line. They flew toward the eerie light blade, and then exploded. Golden flames exploded in the air, and after 10 loud sounds, the black circular blade, which was only 1/3 of its original size, pierced through the flame wall in front of Simmons and landed on his body, instantly cutting off his right arm. Ah! Simmons roared in pain, and his body retreated dozens of meters again. He glanced at the arm that had been cut off, and a cold black aura had already wrapped around the wound, quickly climbing toward his shoulder. Damn it! Simmons' expression changed drastically. He hesitated for a moment, and then waved his hand to cut off the remaining half of his arm. The flames burned the wound, and the flesh was charred, stopping the bleeding. Just as he finished this series of actions, Alfred suddenly appeared behind him. He raised his axe high above his head, and said with a sinister smile, "Die." Simmons' expression changed, but it quickly turned into a resolute one. He punched his chest, and the blood in his body was like lava that was about to erupt. He said furiously, "Even if I die, I'll bring you along with me, you bastard. Self-destruction? Ha, you won't have the chance." Alfred sneered, and the axe slashed down without hesitation. Now, holy light! Meg, who had watched the entire episode, suddenly shouted. Chapter 1359. Holy light, do you see that, Fatso? A soft groan sounded. A beam of holy light tore through the dark night and landed accurately on Alfred's body. The black fog that enveloped his body and the axe was instantly annihilated and retracted back into his body like a tide. He also let out a few shrill cries. Alfred's movements clearly paused for a moment, and a pained expression appeared on his face. Just then, the blood in Simon's body that was surging at an accelerated rate finally reached the critical point of self-destruction. As he looked at the holy light in astonishment, he exploded uncontrollably. Boom! This loud sound was far more powerful than any of the previous attacks. Even the power of the tricolored fire lotus could not compare to it. Simon's body instantly exploded into countless pieces. Blazing flames and shockwaves enveloped Alfred, whose expression had changed drastically, just inches away from him. After enduring several explosions, the entire West Point Island finally collapsed completely in this explosion. It slowly sank to the bottom of the sea. The shockwaves from the explosion smashed the ship on the other side of the shore into pieces. At the same time, it also smashed the terrified abyssal demon into pieces. Aziz, it's our turn. Meg pulled out his long sword and patted Aziz's back lightly. Howl! Aziz let out a cheerful cry and turned into a purple lightning bolt. It dived toward the center of the explosion where the flames had yet to completely disperse. It plunged into the flames and smoke. A purple light shield rose and protected Meg and Irina, who were sitting on its back. Cough, cough, a weak cough sounded. Aziz cautiously flew in that direction. With a flap of its wings, the surrounding flames and smoke immediately dispersed to the sides, revealing Alfred, who was barely supporting himself on a huge rock on the sea. The previously awe-inspiring Alfred had one of his legs broken. His entire body was charred, and there was not a single part of his skin that was intact. He looked rather miserable. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the purple-striped griffin, as well as Meg and Irina, who were sitting on the griffin's back. He spat out a mouthful of blood and said with a shocked and indignant expression, "Alex, Irina, why are you here?" The sudden appearance of the holy light had actually caused his power of the undead to lose its effectiveness instantly. Furthermore, the blow that could have interrupted Simon's self-destruction had also paused for a moment. He had taken Simon's self-destruction head-on in a situation where he was almost defenseless. In the end, he had relied on his thick skin and a fanatic's armor to survive. When he encountered the holy light, he should have thought that it was Irina. However, he could not understand why Alex and Irina, who should have been in Chaos City, would suddenly appear here. I can't say that it's a coincidence. After all, we're the ones who organized this round. Now that you're almost done talking, we should come out and wrap things up and finish this show. Furthermore, you should have expected this day to come when you treated me that year, Mag said with a smile. The way he spoke made him sound like he was the villain. You were the ones who stole the statue. Alfred's expression changed as he suddenly realized that the battle between him and Simmons today was actually Alex and Irina's scheme. Other than people like you who would make a deal with the devil, do you think we need that kind of evil thing? Irina looked at Alfred coldly, and raised the magic caster's staff in her right hand. Alfred, when the demons invaded the wind forest, you abyss demons committed unforgivable crimes against us elves. In the past 100 years, you have harmed and enslaved countless wandering elves. Today, I will judge you on behalf of the God of Life and purify your filthy soul and body. Irina, you have already been chased out of the wind forest, and removed from the elven race. You are no longer the elven princess. What right do you have to judge me? If you kill me, the abyss demons will not let the two of you off. Alfred shouted. His serious injuries made it impossible for him to move or dodge. Clouds of undead black gas surged out of his body and into his wounds in an attempt to heal his body quickly. Irina raised the magic caster's staff above her head. Her expression became holy and solemn as she chanted, "Holy light, that evil seems to be worth fighting. In the name of the God of Light, I order you to purify his soul and banish his body forever." The bright holy light condensed at the tip of the magic caster's staff, and then shone on Alfred. No. Accompanied by Alfred's scream, the undead black gas quickly dissipated under the purification of the holy light. Alfred's body also began to disintegrate under the holy light. His shrill scream echoed throughout the sea. Using the holy light to purify one's body was more painful than death by 1,000 cuts. After a short 3 minutes, the holy light disappeared. Alfred was only left with a charred skin hanging on the giant rock. Justice may be late, but it will never be absent. Irina looked at Alfred's skin and slowly retracted her magic caster's staff. Meg glanced at Irina. She must have crossed off 2 names on her must-kill list. He gently said, "They're all dead. Let's go." "Okay." Irina nodded. With a wave of her hand, a green wind blew past Alfred's tattered skin, removing all traces of the holy light. RZ flapped its wings and flew close to the sea level for a distance. Then, it suddenly rose and pierced into the clouds. The intense battle that broke out on West Point Island quickly attracted the attention of the nearby islands. The distance between the flaming demons and the abyss demons was not too far apart. Thus, the 2 groups of demons arrived at West Point Island almost at the same time. When they saw the sunken West Point Island, all the demons turned pale with fright. Although West Point Island was not big, it was an island that had existed for tens of thousands of years. How could it fall silent so easily? This is the chief's aura. Soon, an abyssal demon discovered the charred leather pouch hanging from the only remaining rock and exclaimed in a trembling voice, "The chief is dead." The expressions of all the abyss demons changed drastically. This was a huge matter for the abyss demons. Why would the powerful chief die here without leaving a complete corpse? Hearing that the abyss demon chief was dead, the expressions of the flaming demons also changed. Who would dare to kill their chief in the abyss demons' territory? This is the internal fire produced when we flaming demons self-destruct. That loud sound just now. A slightly older flaming demon said in a low voice. Isn't this the chief's token? A flaming demon picked up a fiery red token fragment from a rock that was half exposed on the surface of the water. After picking it up, it lit up with a flame. Could it be that the one who self-destructed was our chief? A flaming demon exclaimed. The entire sea instantly quietened down. Chapter 1360. Alfred, who was only left with a charred skin, the remaining anger in the air, and half of the broken chief's token, all of these seemed to point to one result. The abyssal demons and flaming demons present looked at each other, and the atmosphere gradually became tense. However, there was still some confusion in their eyes. Although the abyssal demons and flaming demons were both warlike races, and because their territories were adjacent, they often had small conflicts. However, they were both powerful races, so their overall relationship wasn't bad. Then why did Alfred and Simmons decide to fight here, and why did it end in mutual destruction? The death of the chief was a major event that shook the foundation of both races. The flaming demons killed our chief. Kill them and avenge our chief, a demon among the abyssal demons shouted. The 2 groups of demons that were originally in a stalemate were instantly ignited, and they all charged at each other while shouting loudly. In an instant, the sea was raging, and the sounds of fighting were deafening. The battle ended half an hour later, and there were many demon corpses left on the sea. Only a few escaped with injuries. This night, the Abyssal Island and Flaming Island were destined to be sleepless. On the other side, Meg and Irina, who had caused all this, had just returned to the lobster restaurant. On the way back, he had made a bet with Irina that Amy and Ugly Duckling were still watching Cat and Mouse. Whoever lost would wash the other party's feet tonight. In the end, when he opened the door, he saw Amy and Ugly Duckling rummaging through a pile of spare parts, looking for something. Ugly Duckling, did you find them? Why are they missing? We clearly saw them hiding in a small box, Amy said anxiously as she lay on the ground and knocked hard on the tablet screen. Meow, meow. Tilda. Ugly Duckling stretched out its little paw to dig at the spare parts that were violently dismantled and shook its head. Seems like I won, Irina said with a smile as she stared at Meg. Speaking of which, he had never washed her feet personally. Meg, you. Looking at the spare parts, Meg didn't know whether to laugh or cry. From their conversation, she and Ugly Duckling dismantled the tablet to release Tony and Jack. What a loving thought. He really couldn't reprimand her. Upon hearing their voices, Amy got up from the ground and ran toward Meg and Irina. Father, Mother, you're back. Xiao am I, what's going on? Why did you take apart the tablet? Meg asked with a slightly serious expression as he reached out and picked up Amy. I think it's too pitiful for them to be locked up in such a small box, so I want to let them out to play together. Amy had an innocent look on her face, but she was also a little dejected as she said, but when I opened the box, they disappeared. I think they went into hiding. Do they not want to play with Amy anymore? Looking at Amy's aggrieved expression, Meg's heart softened. He shook his head with a smile and said, No, it's because they're not actually hidden in this box. This is just an image of them, so even if we open the box, we won't be able to see them. An image? Amy was a little puzzled. It's when someone takes a video of what they see. That way, that scene will be recorded forever. We can see what someone took through this small box. So that cat and mouse are actually not in the box, but in a place very, very far away, Meg explained with a smile. He didn't intend to tell Amy that this was a non-existent animation. So that's how it is. Amy nodded as if she understood. Although she didn't completely understand her father's words, she understood that the cat and mouse weren't hidden in the small box. She looked back at the tablet that she had taken apart, and her expression suddenly became a little guilty and uneasy. She grabbed the corner of her clothes with her little hand and stole a glance at Meg. She whispered, But Ugly Duckling and I broke it. It's okay. Father knows that Amy didn't do it on purpose. Just don't take things apart so casually next time. Seeing Amy blaming herself, Meg couldn't bear to scold her. He shook his head with a smile, put Amy on the ground, and walked over to the pile of parts. The tablet that had been taken apart by force couldn't be any more broken. There was no value in repairing it at all. After gathering the big parts and throwing them directly into the trash can, Meg tapped on the cleaning robot. The spherical robot quickly moved over and automatically scanned the trash to remove all the remaining parts. So we won't be able to see the cat and mouse again in the future? Amy asked Meg. Here. Meg took out another tablet that the system had just delivered from the shelf at the side and handed it to Amy with a smile. Wow, there's another one. Amy's eyes lit up, and she reached out to take it with both hands. You're not allowed to take it apart this time, Meg said with a smile. He only let go after Amy nodded solemnly. Let's go, Meg. Your father said that he's going to wash our feet today. Let's play the cat and mouse while we wash our feet. Irina walked up and picked Amy up. She glanced at Meg and said, It's time to boil some water. Okay. Meg nodded, a little embarrassed. What else could he do? He had lost the bet. He didn't expect Amy to take apart the tablet. Meg used 2 wooden basins to get some hot water, and dripped a few drops of rose essential oil into the water. After thinking for a while, he took a rose from a vase at the side, plucked the petals, and scattered them into the water basins. Only then did he bring the hot water into the house. Irina and Amy were sitting on chairs, one tall and one short. Ugly Duckling stuck its head out and squeezed into Amy's arms. It was watching the cat and mouse game with great interest, and it would let out a burst of bell-like laughter from time to time. Meg's gaze fell on Irina's feet. Her shoes had been taken off, revealing a pair of snow-white, slender feet. Her toes were white and smooth, and her instep was slender and slightly arched, as well as her round and cute heels. There wasn't the slightest bit of impurity on her snow-white skin. It was like a white lotus that had just grown, clean and beautiful. Her jade-like feet were like a work of art. Meg's eyes lit up. Although he wasn't a foot fanatic, he had a certain level of appreciation. Here's the water for washing your feet. Meg came in with 2 basins, one big and one small, and gently placed them beside Irina and Amy's feet. Didn't you say that you're going to help me wash my feet? Irina asked with a smile as she raised one of her feet and shifted her gaze from the screen to Meg's face. I want to wash my feet too. Amy also raised her smooth little feet and looked at Meg with a smile. All right, then I'll be a hard-working foot washer today. Meg looked at the 2 pairs of feet in front of him with a resigned smile. He moved the wooden basins to their feet and then gently placed their feet into the basins. After that, he pulled a small stool from the side and sat down in front of them. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1361. Washing feet was actually not a difficult task, especially when he was holding a pair of smooth and delicate feet in his hands. Instead, it was more like a kind of enjoyment. Meg recalled the techniques of the ladies who had massaged him in the past and tried to make himself appear more professional. Perhaps it was the warm water or the hands rubbing her feet that were a little naughty, but Irina's face flushed red and tiny beads of sweat appeared on the tip of her nose. I didn't expect that apart from cooking, he would also be so comfortable washing feet. Looks like I'll have to ask him to massage more in the future. Irina looked at Meg, and her heart secretly rippled. The hands holding her feet were so gentle and strong, and seemed to be even hotter than the water. When they slid across her skin, it brought about a tingling electric shock, making her want to break free, but also indulge in it. All right, add some hot water and soak for a while. After massaging for who knew how long, Meg released his hands and gently lifted her feet out of the water. He then poured in some hot water to maintain the temperature of the water at a comfortable and pleasant temperature. Is it over? Only then did Irina recover from her enjoyment. When her feet were placed in the warm water, her whole body felt relaxed. It was even more comfortable than being brushed by life magic. Little Amy, it's your turn to wash your feet. Meg held up Amy's little feet. The little one's feet were only the size of 2 or 3 of his thumbs. They were white and tender, but couldn't withstand massaging, so after a little washing, he let her soak comfortably in the water again. The fragrance of roses filled the room, and the family of 3 and the cat huddled together to watch the cat and the mouse, laughing non-stop. If the Bartoli family doesn't want another son to die, they better give up on the idea of me remarrying. Otherwise, I will use my own method to reject this marriage alliance. In a dusky castle, Camilla stood in the middle of the main hall, looking up at the tall and thin vampire dressed in black sitting on the high seat. Her voice was cold and resolute. The wall lamp shone with scarlet light. The wind blew in through the narrow window, and the red light swayed slightly. It was as strange as the blood in the crystal goblet in the hand of the vampire sitting on the high throne. The vampire stopped swirling the wine glass in his hand. He looked at Camilla with his blue eyes and said apologetically, "Camilla, you know that the Bartoli family is the most powerful family among the vampires. They even have an ancestor. If you refuse to marry Nox, the Bartoli family will join the war camp, and the vampires will face division. Then, we won't be able to maintain our position as one of the top 10 families. In order to maintain your laughable reputation and status, you want me to marry again?" "Ha, father, have you forgotten what you said when you forced me to marry Noxus? Other than a marriage tool, what am I to you?" Camilla looked at her father, the vampire patriarch, Maynard, with a mocking expression. An unnatural expression flashed across Maynard's face. After a moment of silence, he said, "You know, Noxus and Nox both liked you back then. Noxus died in an accident, and Nox has become the only successor of the Bartoli family. If you marry him, you will receive the support of the Bartoli family and our family. Perhaps one day, you will become the first queen of the vampire family. Become a queen because of my husband's death." Camilla's expression became more and more mocking. "You know, sometimes we have to sacrifice in order to get what we want. I don't want to be sacrificed twice." A pair of wings appeared on Camilla's back. She flapped her wings and flew towards the entrance of the main hall. Maynard raised his hand, and a dim light screen appeared at the entrance of the main hall. Camilla bumped into it, but was bounced back. "I'm sorry, Camilla. I have to do this for the family." Maynard's voice sounded, and he suddenly appeared behind Camilla. He raised his hand and patted the back of her neck. Camilla's eyes were wide open, and she slowly collapsed to the ground. Inform the Bartoli family that Camilla has returned. Ask them to bring their sincerity to marry her, Maynard said coldly as he carried Camilla in his arms. Found it. In the fiery red magma, Sargeras saw a long token floating in the magma. His eyes lit up. A circle of empty space formed around the token. It was like a bubble that isolated the magma from the token. Sargeras dived down and swam towards the token quickly. The temperature of the magma in the depths of the volcano was enough to melt steel. Sargeras' clothes had already turned into ashes, and the magma on the surface of his body was flowing wildly. His body had also turned red. Sargeras, who was infinitely close to 9th tier, also felt that his body was reaching its limit. However, the holy fire token was within reach. He should be the lava demon who was the closest to it in the past few hundred years. His eyes lit up, and the magma on the surface of his body flowed faster again. He reached into the bubble without hesitation, and grabbed the token. It was a golden token that was 1/2 meter long. It was narrow and triangular, and was engraved with complicated runes. There was a symbol of the lava demons at the top. When Sargeras grabbed the seemingly cold token, he instantly felt a terrifying temperature that made his soul tremble. Even the magma didn't hurt him, but the token in his hand was already smoking. As a lava demon, he hadn't felt the pain of being scalded for a long time. The pain from his palm and fingers felt as if they were about to melt. However, Sargeras didn't retract his hand. Instead, he gripped the token even harder. The holy fire token was one of the 3 holy items of the lava demons. The other 2 holy items had already been lost. If the lava demons wanted to rise again, the holy fire token was their only hope. Sargeras knew that even though he was close to 9th tier, the lava demons were still a very weak race on the demon islands. He had to let the holy fire token reappear in the world and remove the seals and shackles on them. The burning pain lasted for a long time. Even a man of steel like Sargeras felt as if his soul was being burned. At that moment, a cold feeling came from the holy fire token, and traveled along Sargeras' arm to his entire body. All the burning and hot feelings disappeared instantly. Meg, who was in the boiling magma, suddenly felt as if he was soaking in warm water. Sargeras was slightly taken aback when he saw the holy fire token glowing with golden light in his palm. Suddenly, a golden light flew out from the holy fire token and entered between his brows. His eyes suddenly became hollow. His soul seemed to have been sucked into a mysterious place, and a mysterious bubble enveloped him. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.